freeway traffic, be it as it may, we're going to get started. We're already 15 minutes late. I'm from New York, so that seems like, I guess this is, somebody said LA time. My name is Tom Nagorski. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Asia Society. It's great to be with you. Again, I haven't been at every one of these. This is the 10th annual, as most of you know, edition of this, what's become a great Asia Society tradition, known at the start as the U.S. China Film Summit, now the U.S. Asia Entertainment Summit, begun as a pretty small, almost a kind of boutique gathering, and now a real nexus of the media and entertainment communities in the U.S. China, and of course, as the title suggests, now other parts of Asia as well. Before this day is done, as is always the case, it seems to get better by the year. We're going to hear from actors and directors, agents and lawyers, studio leaders and leaders in the digital space. In a moment, we'll have a keynote address from a guy who I'm always proud to call a colleague, a former prime minister who's devoted a great deal of energy and time to building the kind of cultural and diplomatic bridges between the United States and Asia, and in particular the United States and China, that are so important to this endeavor as well. Just some quick words of appreciation before we get started. We want to thank, obviously, all the sponsors and supporters of the summit. I'm not going to list them all in the interest of time, but they are in your written materials and also in the PowerPoint loops that will appear throughout the day here. The Asia Society, just a quick word about what we have to do with all of this, and for those who don't know the mission of the organization, we were founded a little more than 6 decades ago, 1956, and I thought just for this crowd, I've never mentioned this before, the Best Picture Oscar in that year, just to kind of orient you. Anybody want to guess? 1956, come on. No, well, 2 excellent guesses, but the Best Picture Oscar that year went to Marty, as we all remember. Ernest Borgnine, lead role. Okay, the founding principles of the Asia Society, which hold true today, to build bridges of understanding between East and West, and to use the arts and culture whenever and wherever possible in the bridge building work. Our founder, John D. Rockefeller III, got a ton of credit, and it's every bit of it, I think, is well earned for having a lot of foresight, not just with founding our organization, but others that looked east. He saw huge potential in Asia at a time when almost no one else did. A time, obviously, we're talking mid-50s, when these were wounded nations. Korea, obviously, just at the tail end of a terrible war on the peninsula. China, roiled by civil war. Japan limping back after World War II, and so forth. Fair to say that for all his foresight, Mr. Rockefeller might not have imagined Pixar, or Imagineering, binge watching, as we're going to talk about later today, or the meteoric rise of new juggernauts called Tencent or Alibaba and all they do. We suspect, though, he'd have understood the power and the importance and the whole point of events like this one, because, as I said, it is another core element in the work of building bridges between the United States and Asia. And as I probably don't need to tell any of you, and I'm sure we'll hear throughout the day, those bridges are in some disrepair at the moment, particularly between China and the United States. So it matters. As I say, I think Mr. Rockefeller would have understood. Just quickly, some social media business. Another thing he might not have foreseen. The hashtag for this event, hashtag U.S Asia ENT Summit. It is being live streamed on a variety of platforms, so we're obviously on the record here. And do please, as always at such events, switch your phones to silent mode out of respect for all who come to the stage throughout the day. It's now my great privilege of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, chair of this summit, and above all, just a real powerhouse of this event from year one, a friend and a colleague. Please welcome Janet Yang.
I'm going to be really, really short because I don't want to take time away from our speakers. First of all, I'm so happy that we're in a building that was saved from the fires. How crazy was that? Yes, it has been really a pleasure. I really believe in the power of of in-person connectivity and that we can join hands around the globe. When we started this, people barely knew there was a film industry in China, and we got together because we wanted to share our own experiences, and that has obviously grown. And now, as borders collapse all around us, there is no reason to talk just about China without the rest of Asia. There's no reason to talk about film without the rest of the entertainment business. So we're here to try to keep adjusting our focus to what's most relevant and what's most important to you, and where we can really just support each other and get behind the headlines and get behind sort of declarations of various government leaders, which, you know, we know there's always, the story is more complex than that. So I just want to thank you all very much. Some of you are real devotees year in and year out, and we're happy to have new guests as well. Tom did mention all the other important points about hashtag and about live streaming and whatnot, but we are happy that you're here in person today because there's nothing like the live experience. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce one of the friends of the summit, just a beautiful man, I have to say. He's always got a smile on his face, and he has a really, really tough job. He is in charge of the Asia-Pacific region for the Motion Picture Association, which is obviously, you know, something that all the studios are participants of. And I can't even imagine what it's like to wake up and be Mike Ellis, but here he is. Thank you.
Waking up as Mike Ellis. Every day I wake up is a good day, that's what I say. Okay, thank you very, very much, Tom and Janet, for yet again your tireless effort in putting this event together. And of course, all of you who've come here today and people out there watching this on the live stream. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I get the opportunity to put up on the stage some of the top-line numbers that relate to this industry in the Asia-Pacific region. As Albert Einstein said, do one thing every day that scares you. I'm not sure he was thinking about the movie industry, but those of you who are engaged in making the product, I think you know where he was coming from. I'm going to walk you through some of the key economic data points that relate to the film and resonate, hopefully, with you as participants and creators and journalists, and hopefully set the context of, as Janet said, while we have focused on China over the years, I'm going to sort of broaden it a little bit and touch on the other markets that are major drivers in Asia, in particular Japan and South Korea as well. The first slide up there really tells you what you need to know about this region. You know, it has the #1 box office in the whole world. It is a really, really important region economically and, of course, for the content that is being made. 8 out of the top 20 markets in the world, including America, of course, that leads the way, are based in the Asia-Pacific region. And they account for over 40% of the total revenue. Really impressive numbers. The next slide I'm going to put up is what we call our economic contribution reports. And you'll find on your desks a couple of sheets. One of them is China, and one of them is South Korea. The China one was published earlier this year in January. And the Korea one is actually not going to be published until December, but the summary sheet is the top-line numbers that we're giving you the exclusive on here today. And I don't have a sheet in front of me, but we also, just last week, released our numbers in Japan. And the MPA is very fortunate that we have great support, of course, from the studios I represent, but also from local industry to pull these key data points together. And I think when you look at it, you will see the top-line numbers there of how important the industry is as a contributor to GDP, but also to the tax revenue. And then finally, for the number of people who are actually employed in this industry. And of course, the statistics are there. I'm not going to read every line there. This is a top-line note for you. But those numbers are there, and it's an impressive number. When I work with governments in the region and with local industry, it's a great reminder that this is an industry that not only contributes to the well-being of people and gives the entertainment value and the culture, but the bottom line, it's a real revenue driver. And I think that's really important for us to be aware of. And for us in the MPA, we publish these reports every couple of years, and we're able to track those changes. And it's an industry which is growing. This is one of the few industries where, as much as AI is coming in and people talk about the jobs disappearing. When you create content, you need people. You really need people to make a film. And so, we are in definitely a growth industry across the whole of Asia Pacific. Next slide. And if you look at the top line numbers in terms of how many screens are in Asia Pacific, the China one always blows me away in terms of how many new screens are being added every day. The number there is 60,000, but I think this year, again, it depends which statistics you look at, it's either 23 or 26 screens are being added every single day. And that number still amazes me when I think about it. But if you look at the average admissions per head, it's still only one. And then you compare that with Korea, which is a very mature marketplace, and you're looking at 4. So the upside is there. And I think you'll start to see those numbers increase. We have in China anyway. This used to be, didn't even reach 1 a few years ago. And Japan also, pretty low down at 1. But again, not a great screen capacity there at the moment, and difficult with real estate and land and the population density where it's concentrated as well. But the good news is that more people are going to the cinema than ever before in Asia. There's no question about that. And again, if you look at the overriding statistics, you'll find there are more people going to movies in not only China, but also India than virtually any other countries in the world. And again, you will continue to see that grow in the years ahead. When I look at the next slide. When I look at those top markets, our films do very well. There's no question about that. In China, these are our top 3 films, and if you look at that revenue number for Avengers Endgame, that's truly staggering, and that's off a release window of just 1 month. And equally, Hobbs and Shaw, terrific numbers, and Spider-Man as well. And it's interesting that when I meet with government officials, and Chinese government officials in particular, I'm often criticized for our members making these blockbuster-type movies when we should maybe be focusing on more family-orientated and drama-type movies. But it's a business, and those numbers tell the story. This is what the audiences like to see, and as long as audiences like to see those movies, I'm sure that we will respond and make those types of movies. If you look at the top 3 films in Japan, then again, Disney, of course, doing incredibly well there with some beautiful films, finding a good audience base. But great revenue numbers, great films, really, really well received. And I was recently in Japan, and I saw The Joker on a Monday evening at 6:30. Capacity was about 90% on a Monday evening. So audiences really warming to these big films. And then if you look at Korea, similar type of film, Avengers again, obviously doing incredibly well there, but a very similar spread of what the top films are in these markets. And then if you look, and I always like to pull this slide up, in particular on China. I know we're supposed to be looking more regionally, but China is a very important marketplace. There's no question about that. There were 8 films in 2018 that made more revenue in China than they did in America. So China, for the American industry and Hollywood in particular, is a critical marketplace for us. And if we look in the current year, there are currently 4 films that have done better in China than they have in America. And I think that, again, tells a story of how important this marketplace is for American filmmakers. But it's not just at the theatrical release level that we're looking at. One of the important areas is partnerships. And if you look, for example, with Tencent and the partnership they're doing with Disney right now, I think this is just the start of things to come, where they've teamed up to develop a Chinese Star Wars online novel series. And they've taken 40 older ebooks, made them into Chinese, and really trying to embrace that audience with the Star Wars story. And I think, again, Star Wars and that type of initiative will continue to grow in this region. Next slide. And then if you look across the region, in particular Japanese films are finding an audience mainly in China, and about 12 months ago I would have said also in Korea. Bit of a slowdown there for diplomatic reasons. And if you've been reading that, I think you'll understand that. But generally, Japanese films have been traveling well into China. And this year in particular, Japanese films have had 6 films in China released, whereas India has had 1 and Korea has 0. So the China market for Japanese films has done particularly well. And in particular, the film Shoplifters, which, an award-winning film, an Oscar nomination, won the Cannes Palme d'Or. That made $14.1 million in China, which is probably the most successful overseas film revenue they've had from a Japanese production. So I think that is a marketplace that right now is very, very, very topical, and I think critical to the Japanese industry. And in fact, that a number of Chinese producers are working in collaboration with Japanese producers and looking at how they can do co-productions. That will hopefully hit both marketplaces. Generally speaking, Chinese films don't do that well in Japan, but hopefully with the right mix of product, they will be able to do that. And right now, there is Detective Chinatown franchise, Wanda's Detective China franchise is actually shooting in Tokyo. So I think that creates an opportunity for a film that may resonate and cross over into both markets and hopefully generate continued interest in the Japanese marketplace for Chinese films. And also it was announced at TIFCOM that the Japanese and Chinese partners are looking to produce a co-production remake of Still Life. So that too, the remake opportunities are obviously always there. In terms of animation, I see Asia continuing to grow. Already, if you look inwards at the various countries, they do some terrific animations. And I think you will see that will have an easier appeal to move between markets. Of course, the translation side of it makes it a lot easier in animation than it does for traditional film. But I think there's a huge recognition that there is a growing marketplace for that. And earlier this year, I saw White Snake in China, did incredibly well. I think it was Warner Brothers that released that. But that type of product, I think, will certainly travel around the Asia region. And co-productions will probably be easier in that space as well. And it's also very interesting that our streaming platforms are also now getting going. The fact that obviously Netflix up front and central, doing incredibly well across Asia, and whereas they may not be in China, the fact is they are actually taking Chinese product and distributing it across the world. Wandering Earth is a great example of that, a film that obviously did very, very well in China and deserved a global audience that through traditional distribution would be hard to do, but with an OTT platform, one that can find marketplaces throughout the world, and a film, again, that I think will bring great credit to the ability of Chinese producers. And also, just as a consumer myself, my ability now to watch product from all over the world, whether I'm watching stuff from product from Europe or South America or across other parts of Asia, it's going to be far easier for everybody to be able to capture those products. So I think the created video marketplace, and if you looked at the statistics earlier, when we looked at the video audiences, Korea really up there, but there's a huge growth potential in those other marketplaces, and Japan for a period has certainly been a laggard in terms of digital releases, but that will change in the coming months and years ahead. And in particular, another film that is being co-produced is Flowers of Youth, made by the same people who did the very popular Your Name. So again, these local co-productions in Asia are taking place. And often I've stood on this stage and talked about co-productions between China and America. I think those co-productions are going to take place much more frequently around Asia and other parts of the world. I was at the Venice Film Festival looking at co-production markets there, and they in fact have signed a treaty with China. So, everybody is looking at the opportunity there, and China just is not focused on only America for those products that they can combine with and do some local more locally focused product. So in conclusion, what I would say, of course, there's a lot of politics at play, and I'm mindful that I'm being broadcast, but of course the macro politics of America and China overshadow often the industry. But what I can say for certainly our sector in China, the studios that I represent are releasing great films. They're finding a great audience. We're getting paid. There's been no slowdown in the number of films that we're getting in, and there's no slowdown in the audience. You know, the statistics tell the tale. Our films are finding a marketplace there and are doing incredibly well. So I'm delighted by that. And I think if you look underneath that across the whole region, there are opportunities that will continue to present themselves even in the backdrop of some of the political issues that are in play. And I'm looking right now, the China-Korea situation, obviously a little bit delicate, and there is a bit of an impact there. But I think the China one often gets a little bit overplayed, that our industry is in trouble. It's certainly not. And I see the opportunity not only for our industry, but the whole of the Chinese industry to grow, as I do in Japan and Korea and everywhere else in Asia. I think the OTT environment will mean that not just our studios are going to be coming with their product offerings, but local industry are responding with their own platforms as well. And the viewers are going to have more choice than ever before. So I'd say the future is, certainly in Asia, is very, very bright. I am optimistic about it. And when I wake up in the morning and get that first cup of coffee, I know it's going to be a good day. And I think today will be a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. You're always caffeinated, actually. So I'm glad you had that cup of coffee. But it's honestly almost every day that I've been here. Good one. Every year that I've been here, Michael Ellis has done a great job, not just with the numbers, but the stories behind the numbers to frame things as we get started. My pleasure now to introduce, as I said a moment ago, a keynote speaker for this morning. I mentioned the history of the Asia Society as an organization that builds bridges between the United States and Asia. And our next speaker is a true bridge builder, a truly great bridge builder, a gifted one. He's passionate in particular about China and the U.S. China relationship, having studied China and the Mandarin language, by the way, for the better part of 30 years. He has served as Foreign Minister of Australia, as Prime Minister of Australia. And 5 years ago, we at the Asia Society in New York were looking to power up our policy proposition. I mentioned we do a ton of work in the arts and culture. Policy is the key other pillar of our work. And we were looking for a founding president for the newly minted Asia Society Policy Institute. And when this gentleman came to speak at an event at our New York headquarters 5 years ago, almost to the date, several of us and several of our trustees said, that's the man we want for the job. It is our great good fortune that that's the man we got for the job. You might wonder what's a think tank leader and a former head of state doing at a U.S. Asia Entertainment Summit. Well, you're about to find out. Please welcome founding president of the Asia Society Policy Institute, former Prime Minister of Australia, making his way down the aisle from the back, the Honorable Kevin Rudd.
Thanks very much, Tom. Sorry my voice is a little tricky this morning. I've just flown in from Beijing. And prior to that, I was in Riyadh. And so I'm not quite sure where I am today. But my voice was left several capitals away from here. So thank you for the kind and generous introduction, Tom. Why am I here? Well, I've been in politics, and I've done a few things like that. But in Australia, we have this saying that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. So it's natural to actually come to Hollywood itself at some stage. So. And thank you, Michael, for the tour d'horizon of what's happening in the wider industry. That was useful and, for me, informative across the region. Can you hear me okay at the back there? Voice okay? I sounded a little bit like Mae West this morning. I always believed, though, in the Mae West doctrine of politics, which is it's far better to be looked over than overlooked. As Tom mentioned in his introduction, I've spent a lot of my life in and out of Asia, and a lot of my life in China. I began as a student of Chinese language at the Australian National University. Having graduated in the 80s, we were essentially unemployable in those days. Who was interested in China? And so the only place that would give me a job was the Australian Foreign Service. So off I went to Beijing and lived and worked there for quite a number of years during the 1980s. At various times in Beijing and Shanghai, Hong Kong, sometime in Taipei. So I got to know this region well. And subsequently, when I slid down the food chain of life into politics and was our country's foreign minister and prime minister, I placed a huge priority on our wider engagement with the countries of the region, Indonesia, our neighbour, the other countries of Southeast Asia, Japan, the Republic of Korea, India, and the wider region. For our part of the world, this is home. And while Asia itself can sometimes be a very fractious family, as indicated just before, it's a dynamic family. And it's a part of the world which is remarkably confident about its future, despite the overlay of geopolitics everywhere. So in my time this morning, let me reflect for a moment on what I've been asked to talk to you about, which is this industry, the film and entertainment industry, occurs in a geopolitical context, whether you like it or not, like any other industry. Tomorrow, or the day after, I'm addressing the Semiconductor Association of America up in San Francisco. They feel geopolitics acutely, just like any other industry, and this one as well. It's very hard to separate yourself from the wider realities of what's unfolding, even though many of us would prefer it if we could do so. So looking to 2020, what's the shape of the wider Asia-Pacific region looking like? The central dynamic of it all is what's unfolding in U.S. China relations. Who's here from China? Just give me a sense. 欢迎，大家都是北京来的吗？上海吗？什么地方？上海，大上海，上海我也住过，不错，那个小城市。The U.S.-China relationship is going to be increasingly difficult at a structural level, whether we like it or not. It's called geopolitical rivalry, and that's what's unfolding. If I look carefully at statements coming out of Secretary of State Pompeo here in the United States, this conflict, competition, call it what you will, between China and the United States, is assuming an increasingly ideological tone as well. Secretary Pompeo the other day described in his speech China as being hostile to American interests and values. So this ideational tone or content to the overall relationship, I think, is going to present us with greater and greater complexity, but frankly also some opportunities as the year unfolds. Geopolitically, as I said before, the US-China relationship has become increasingly fractious, quite apart from the obvious continuing flashpoints of unresolved tensions in the South China Sea, unresolved issues over Taiwan, and China's long-term determination to secure Taiwan's return to the PRC sovereignty, and unfolding protest movements in Hong Kong. There is a wider geopolitical competition now between China and the United States. I've lost the mic. Thank you for the sound department. I appreciate it very much. On the economy, there is a great debate unfolding in this country, and to some extent in China as well, called the great decoupling of the US and Chinese economies. 脱钩 is the Chinese word. Like a lot of language in politics and geopolitics, language can be dangerous, particularly when it vastly exceeds the reality. I'm the first to recognize there are difficulties, profound difficulties, in the US-China economic relationship. But to say that we are definitively on a trajectory towards economic decoupling is a vast exaggeration on the reality. Just reflect for a moment. The US-China trade war is serious. Yes, it's been raging for 18 months now. But because of profound economic self-interest on both sides of the Pacific, the bottom line is the likelihood that there will be a phase one trade deal between China and the United States, possibly by Thanksgiving, is, I think, highly probable. And that's because President Trump doesn't want to tank the US economy in an election year in 2020, and Xi Dada, President Xi Jinping of China, Uncle Xi, as some of us call him, he doesn't want to add further headwinds to economic growth within China itself. And the current trade war is having a palpable impact on business confidence in China, apart from other factors. It is in the deep interests of these two leaders to put this thing to bed as soon as possible. The phase one trade deal, I therefore think, is probable. Phase two, which is harder because it goes to some of the more intractable unresolved tensions in the US-China economic relationship, such as Chinese state subsidy for Chinese firms operating in the global marketplace. That is going to be more difficult, but on the balance of probabilities, given how difficult growth is for the global economy next year and for America and for China, a failure to deliver a phase two deal in the first part of next year would have a wounding effect on global confidence and business confidence in this country next year as well. So I think, while more difficult than phase one, it's still probable that we will get a phase two deal next year as well. The idea, therefore, that these two countries are proceeding in the direction of definitive, comprehensive economic decoupling as manifest in a $500 billion trading relationship between them is, to quote the Australian prophets, just a lot of bull dust. It's just not there in the data. Then you look at foreign direct investment, kind of more interesting and more complex, particularly in the tech sector. Foreign direct investment by China in the United States, largely driven by domestic deleveraging campaigns as they apply to Chinese firms, has been slowing generically to a trickle in the last year to 18 months. Less a reflection of the trade war, though that has influenced it, but primarily because of China's own restrictions imposed on the free operation of the capital account and your ability to repatriate dollars from within China to foreign partners. But so therefore, when I look at the foreign direct investment relationship, it is slowing, but for reasons probably separate from geopolitical tension at this stage. Interestingly, US foreign direct investment flows into China are largely holding up. Move to technology, it's a bigger decoupling question. Of course, we know what's happening with Huawei and 5G. And frankly, the fact that we've had a dual world of internet governance now for 15 or 20 years between China and the United States, or between China and the West, has now basically been accepted as part of the global geopolitical reality. We are likely to see the same now with 5G between the United States and some of its allies and China. And then an open question on where we go in the future of the semiconductor industry, computer chips, and more broadly AI, where China's own resolve to achieve national self-resilience and self-reliance in these new major high-tech drivers of the future, consistent with its 2025 National High-Tech Strategy and its National AI Strategy released in 2017, we are likely to see some significant decoupling in the tech sector over time. It will not be comprehensive, but some. That's the realistic prognosis. Then when I look at capital markets are actually saying something quite the reverse again. This is a huge financial relationship. If you aggregate all the numbers, including the equity holdings both in the New York and Shanghai exchanges, portfolio investment, plus the holding by the Chinese of U.S. Treasuries. Put all these things together, there is an aggregate financial relationship now of some $5.1 trillion. Not billion, trillion. This is quite a large piece of cash in anyone's measure. To put it in quantitative terms, that equals 1/3 of Chinese GDP. But this is not small, it's large. And there are huge mutual self-interests, both in Washington, New York, and Beijing and Shanghai, to keep these arteries of finance flowing. China has a particular interest as well. As of 2019, China, for the first time in a quarter of a century, is likely to generate its first current account deficit. It will begin to encounter the need for an international financing requirement. Therefore, China needs to keep global capital markets open to it because for the first time in a long time it has an external financing need. Not a huge one, but one which needs continued access to global markets. Now, there are political pressures pushing the other direction from Washington. I look at Marco Rubio's efforts to introduce what is called the Equitable Act, which would have the effect, if legislated and not vetoed by the White House, of forcing any non-compliant Chinese firm to delist from the New York Stock Exchange. I think there will be a view on the part of the New York Stock Exchange that may not be a good thing, but I think there's a long way for this one to play out, and the probability of the Rubio draft obtaining a majority in the House and the Senate remains very much an open question. And there are other proposals too to limit US pension fund investments into Chinese equities in particularly identified Chinese firms, which the United States government may have particular problems with for security or human rights reasons. Its prospects of finding its way through legislation, regulation, or through regulation is an open question. But my overall thesis to you when you look at what's happening in capital markets is that the evidence substantively of decoupling between the US and Chinese economies is fairly marginal. There are pressures, like the ones I've just referred to, but still marginal. I think one thing to look at in terms of future decoupling questions is the future of the renminbi, the yuan, and the dollar itself. China has long had a desire to internationalize the renminbi, its currency. It doesn't like being globally dependent on a dollar-denominated international economy. But there are constraints about what China can do, because China does not want to liberalize its own exchange rate on the yuan, nor does it want to open its own capital accounts to full, as it were, tradability. Why? Because China doesn't want to yield itself to external influence in its own domestic economic and political autonomy. Because of that domestic decision in China, there's therefore a limit to what China can do in traditional terms in freeing itself from a global economy which continues to be US dollar denominated. One interesting development, though, to keep your eye on is the announcement, literally within the last week, of China's proposal to accelerate the development of an international digital currency, an international digital renminbi, an international digital yuan. China is very mindful of what Facebook is seeking to do with Libra and wishes to be ahead of the curve. We therefore need to look very carefully about where this heads in the future as an alternative to China's classical and continuing traditional reliance on the dollar for its international economic transactions. And the reason I say that is that the global digital economy, currently dominated by Alibaba and by Tencent, is beginning to create a new demand for international digital finance of an order of magnitude which historically did not exist. This is a new dynamic in the new currency markets of the future. I conclude by saying this, that on the question of decoupling, the last thing for us to reflect on is what's happening with people, like all of you. I begin to see new visa restrictions emerging in both countries towards each other. This is not good. For the first time in the United States, the last 2 years, we've seen a decline in international student applications to American universities, driven by what's happening with China. I see an increase in Chinese student visa applications, by contrast, into the United Kingdom. And so what happens in this talent market long term, and the whole depth and breadth of people-to-people engagement and professional engagement right across the creative industries, technology and the rest, which has been accumulating for the last 40 years, I'm a little worried about where that is now headed. But my overall thesis to you is that whether it's trade, foreign direct investment, technology, capital markets, currency or talent, is that it's a mixed picture. But the overall fabric of continued significant economic engagement remains, albeit under significant and rising geopolitical pressure. A concluding thought or two about what all this means for your industry. It would be foolish for me to stand here in front of you today and say I know anything about your industry, because I don't. I just watch it, and I like it, and that's about all I know. So life is full of people, particularly in the political class, who stand up and pretend to know things that they don't. I'm not going to do that. You know what you're doing. It's your business. But here's just a final reflection and thought. On the structural tensions which exist between the US and Chinese governments and the economies, that will have some implications for the future in terms of domestic censorship regimes within China itself as it applies to foreign-produced product. It will have implications also in terms of potentially the number of foreign titles which are allowed into the Chinese market in a given year, currently capped at 34, and the proportion within that which come from the United States. And there may be implications too in terms of China's own, until recently, buoyant box office market and gaming market, despite the fact there have been some restrictions on gaming in recent times. But you as industry experts and professionals are aware of all of that. But my concluding thought is this. US-China relations, whether we like it or not, is affecting the rest of Asia big time. It affects Japan's perception of its future. It affects India's perceptions of its future. It affects Southeast Asia's perception of its future. And I've just been in the Gulf, and it affects the Gulf's perception of its future as well. If we end up being caught in an ultimate strategic and economic binary in a bipolar American and Chinese world. Now, therefore, those engaged in the business of geopolitics, professional diplomats like I have been in the past, basically so far have failed to deal with this emerging structural tension between these two elephants of the 21st century, China and the United States. By and large, the domestic political class in both countries have failed as well, as this crisis has simply gone from bad to worse. I don't see a whole lot of evidence of major corporate leadership in both countries trying to build bridges in the 21st century between the two economies because they perceive the domestic political pressures in their countries tearing them in a different direction. So all else has failed. We're surrendering the US-China relationship now to Hollywood. It's over to you to do some serious rethinking about how the hell do we manage this for the future. And I say this partly flippantly, but partly with a serious content. So much of international relations, in my own experience, having been a practitioner, as a professional diplomat, but also as a political leader, and now as a leader of an American think tank, focusing almost exclusively on US Asia relations, is this. So much of it hinges on the way we think about each other. The Chinese have a term, siwei, a way of thinking. And siweis in all of our cultures are deeply embedded. There is a deeply embedded Chinese worldview, a Shijieguan. There's a deeply embedded Chinese traditional siwei, way of thinking, about how you regard Yangren, foreigners, how you regard Bairen, white guys. Now, I understand that. Nothing wrong with that. It's just reality. Guess what? We foreign barbarians have exactly the same. So therefore, there is a remarkable opportunity for those of you who have a creative brain, and those of us in the political class, by and large, don't have one, to begin to explore different ways of thinking about each other through the enormously dynamic and creative medium of film and entertainment. There are stories and narratives, I'm sure, which may not lend itself to the current mood for general dystopia and may push us in a different direction. But my humble encouragement, someone speaking from the political benches, is dystopia doesn't get us very far. In fact, exploring underneath the deep thematics, both in love and in life, how people from utterly different and disparate cultures can not only coexist, but actually like each other, work together, and in fact form interesting creative futures together, that has so many possibilities. Not just in terms of good film and entertainment, in my judgment, but what would I know? I'm just from the political class. But also in changing the way we think about each other. And I think that is a serious challenge for the future. At the very end of the Qing dynasty, a small story. China's last imperial reformer, interestingly, the Empress Dowager, Cixi Taiho. Her closest friend was the wife of the then American ambassador in Beijing. And they formed a very deep friendship from about 1901 to about 1908. It's an extraordinary friendship when you look at the correspondence which arises from it. An extraordinary basis for a film about how effectively the last empress and this brilliant international woman, part of the new face of Teddy Roosevelt's global diplomacy, could form a friendship in the midst of all of that. Now, if that was possible, why isn't it possible today? I thank you for your attention.
So if I'm not mistaken, Kevin Rudd has not only challenged Hollywood to solve the U.S. China relationship, but he's also pitched a film. It's perfect room to do that. Okay. Thank you so much, Kevin. You give us a ton to think about, as Michael did before you. We move now to an example of how this summit has shifted from a U.S. China focus to something broader, with a panel under the heading Marketplace, Selling to Asia's Two Giants, and I don't probably need to tell you who that other giant is. You'll know in a moment. To lead this first of the day's many panel conversations, please welcome to the stage the Asia editor for Variety, Patrick Frater. Patrick?
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. That sounded a little brighter than I feared. I certainly know how Kevin Rudd feels when he says he's got a bit of jet lag. Can I bring up my 5 panelists, please?
Thank you.
Are we going to sit in order? That's very clever of us. Well done.
Okay. You're the front.
Jing, you come here. Yes.
Sit next to you. Oh, it's there.
Yeah. I can mix it up.
Tom referred to the slightly broadened focus of this year's conference. I'm personally delighted that the focus has been broadened from U.S. China to U.S. Asia. There's quite a lot of Asia. I think I read a Financial Times story earlier this year that calculated the global GDP from 2020, next year, will be 51% Asian. So we're in the majority from now on. But I'm slightly confused by the title of this particular session. I don't know that we're just going to be talking about old-fashioned rights sales. I think we're going to be talking about co-production, cross-border finance, shared experiences, and many different kinds of business opportunity. And particularly Asia's changing place in the world, which, as I said, is now rather important. And I think in particular today's session is going to be talking about China and India, the two elephants that Kevin Rudd mentioned were US and China, but in fact perhaps there are three elephants, US, China, India. And to help us break down those markets and those opportunities, I have an excellent clutch of 5 panelists today. Jing Chao on my immediate right, counsel with O'Melveny and Myers. You can read most of this stuff up here anyway, so I'll go very quickly. Guneet, who's an old friend from India, producer who grabbed me one time at Film Bazaar and said, "Who are you?" Bennett Posel, who's been a regular at this session for many years, film banker extraordinaire. William Chan, far end. And I've got to get your English name correct. Huang Huaichen, also known as Sum Huang, correct? Excellent. Well, the first question I've got is kind of a bring us up to date question, and I'm maybe ask you two first. This time last year, this conference appeared to be celebrating 2 phenomena. One was Crazy Rich Asians, Hollywood's biggest attempt at Asian diversity, at least on screen, and The Meg, the most successful ever US-Chinese co-production. Bring us up to date. Which of those were more important? Bennett?
Well, I think probably the biggest story, starting about last year when we were here, is the changes that were taking place in China for the local business. And the local business needs to be strong in order to, help the local players, like Sum, for example, and William, partner here in the U.S. or partner in Europe or partner, elsewhere. So I don't think I have to get into all the details of what was going on, but there's a change in what you're going to make, how you're going to make it, how you relate with your actors, how your actors are going to relate with the tax board, right? That was kind of a joke, that last part.
Well, you haven't explained the elephant in the room. You haven't given us the catalyst for those changes.
Well, was that a sorry for me? Because I felt sorry for me too, but that's okay. All right. So, I think with the changes, I think it started with the controlling, body moved out of SARFT, right? Moved over into propaganda, closer to the top of the government. And the changes itself, aren't a bad thing. I think what was happening is there's a lot of confusion where, hey, I made this show, and the old board approved it, so logic would dictate that I can now release the show, and you can't release it. And so you've already invested money into something that you now can't exploit. So when you look at companies who are making that show, if it's Alibaba, you can afford to sit on it. A lot of other companies would be what I would call emerging companies, where maybe they were private equity backed, maybe they had just gone public or wanted to go public, and trying to raise all the capital they can to invest into more content or infrastructure, either locally or connecting outside. And so that was one big impact. The second big impact is how actors, companies, production entities need to relate regarding taxes with the rules. And again, it's not like everything was crystal clear. So there was a big sucking of capital that again went out of these companies. And so when your capital's shrinking and you're thinking, what am I going to make next? And how do I increase the odds of what I'm going to make is going to be exploited? That created a vacuum for a while. I believe today that we've, I think, gone through the worst of that. My sources on the ground, which is really these two guys, are telling me that there's already 30 movies ramped up for Chinese New Year. So it sounds like production is back in swing, and there's more consistency. But over this past year, it's been tough.
Jing Chao?
So I think when it comes to the question, like, which one is more important, we need to define, like, to what audience we're talking about. Personally, I like Crazy Rich Asian a lot, but from what I heard, the release in China was fine, but not as amazing as what we had expected. So I think the influence for that movie in Hollywood is it first time bring a whole Asian cast to a major studio movie and then made a very successful release in the US, and then bring people attention to casts that are non-Americans. So it has a very positive influence on, like, people when they select a cast, they will actually give more consideration to Asian background, like, actors and actresses. And it has been a long time, like, Asian actors have been struggling in Hollywood, and there have been, like, a lot of coverage about Asian background actors or actresses was not being paid equally and was not given a leading role in, like, any Hollywood, like, dominant production. So I think from that perspective, that movie is definitely, like, groundbreaking. And after that, we saw more Asian, like, focused, like, themes and Asian leading cast. For an example, an independent production, The Farewell, was very successfully released early this year, and then it's going to be released in China. So I think that movie brought Asian cast into the spotlight of the audience. From that perspective, it's definitely very important, and I would say from U.S. audience perspective, it's more important.
Right.
The MAG, again, it's a very successful co-production and achieved, like, great financial returns for the investors. So from that perspective, people see that co-production can have a future. We have been talking about co-productions for many, many years. And still, we were struggling to come up with, like, a concept, a story that will appeal to both U.S. and Chinese audience. And it is just, like, hard. It's not something you can easily fix or just, like, make up something that, audience with different tastes will all like. So MAG approved that there is a way you can achieve that, but it's not something I think can be easily duplicated. So I don't think I answered your question, but I feel like...
No, you actually answered the question. I didn't answer the question.
Exactly.
So the thing is, like, when it comes to importance, it really is, like, through which lens you're looking at this. And I think for different purpose, they are both very important and influential in their own way.
Co-productions remaining tricky, I think I'm hearing that message from you, and I think we'll hear that again through the day today. Guneet, has India joined the international industry any more in the last year? What progress has been made?
Firstly, I love that I'm representing
the whole of
elephant
India
on this panel, so thank you for the opportunity. I think, in India, firstly, India is many countries put together. It's amazing how robust the market is in various languages, which we also do not understand. So, amongst India. So, there's a South India industry, which is further divided into Tamil and Telugu. There's a Hindi industry, which is known as Bollywood, for lack of any other expression. But Bollywood does not represent the whole India. I think Indian film industry should be called an Indian film industry. It has various languages, and each of them are as big and as robust and as huge. And the remake possibilities in India are across languages. And our actors don't cross our, so it's pretty robust. So firstly that, and a couple of years ago, the internet increased and Geo pipelines came in and 4G came into India, and it's gone out of the roof. And that's what has led to all the American players and digital content, Amazon, Netflix, looking at India as saying, that's where our next 100 million subscribers are coming from. Also, the territories which are within India, which are like Delhi, Bombay, are like any metro around the world. But because of the sheer population and the penetration of mobile and internet, the other cities like Tier B, Tier C cities have just discovered Facebook. And YouTube 2 years ago saw a 500% increase in their user base. So India has just opened up, and tier C cities are using Facebook in such a huge way. So it is a dynamic place where the digital world, now there are digital stars, there is digital content, there's digital branding, and there's a whole economy working on the whole digital world besides the movie stars who have been there for a while. So it's growing, it's robust.
Thank you for plunging straight into the Indian diversity issue, because I think a lot of people have misunderstood that.
Yeah.
Labeling India as one place when in fact it's always been many, many
Yeah.
languages, cultures, castes, regions, and so on. Could you maybe just help us a little bit understand how that is beginning to come together? I mean, I think Hollywood has actually played a little bit of a part in that.
Yes. So I think in 2006, to when Hollywood films really started opening up, I have some data that they started releasing movies. The global box office in around 2006 was something like 30 million for Hollywood films in India. And now in like 12, 14 years, it's 191 million.
6 times, yeah.
Yeah, and it is growing, it is growing at a 10% compounded annual interest rate, and films like Avengers, which has done so well, did a box office of 61 million. Only in India.
Unheard of in India.
Unheard of, and it's
And one of the reasons has been
dubbing.
Dubbing.
They have started dubbing in at least the top 3 languages, which is Tamil, Telugu, and Hindi. There are many other languages to further navigate and make it into Bengali and Punjabi, and but Tamil, Telugu, and Hindi comprise the lion's share of box office, which actually Hollywood films have cracked it even better than us in India. So it's, and also something to say about technology, because 3D and 4D Max is still such high quality than local Indian films that there's an amazement to see that. There is the ticket price has increased in India over a period of time. It's all-time high now, and all that has factored into increasing the large box office from, at least from pan-India. Hollywood films used to be lesser than 3%, and now they are between 10 and 15% of India's box office.
And as you say, that they've somewhat led the example,
Yes.
set an example which other Indian companies have followed, that they look at more than their own their own linguistic group.
Yes, and also further dubbing it for TV releases and various TV channels in various territories. So it's a massive market.
I wonder if I can bring in the 2 guys at the end who I think of as the digital guys. Theatrical has been
Trying to be, yeah.
theatrical has been growing in both India and China, but also so has digital. It hasn't been one or the other. Those 2 haven't compromised each other very much. Is that also your analysis?
Is that a question for me or Sam?
You're talking, so grab it.
I think, like, if I understand the question correctly, Patrick, I mean, from what I'm seeing on the ground, right? I mean, both theatrical and the streaming services are facing the same challenge, which is nowadays there's so many options for the Chinese audience, and potentially who used to enjoy content as their single way of entertainment for most of the time, but nowadays they have short form video, they have so many mobile games, and the attention that they put on a piece of content become less and less. Excuse me. And so what you see is a trend that not only the streaming platforms are competing with each other, not only the streaming platform is competing with the theatrical content, but in general, right, they are competing with various means of entertainment and cultural product that's available out there, right? So I think that's the most single important trend I'm seeing after transitioning from a TV studio executive to a data expert, that what I'm seeing right now. I don't know if I answered that question clearly, but and I think that's the biggest trend, what I'm witnessing right now.
You want to grab this as well? Do you want to join in?
I mean, you are here on the panel, so you got to talk a little bit.
I'm not really a digital guy because before founding XG, I'm always like a banker and private equity guy. Because your question is about co-production, and like since 2012, was like wandering around in Hollywood meeting various companies, starting from talking, if you remember, all those slave financing deal with Sony and everyone. And you did see some China money came in, like Perfect World, like Bona, and even Hunan TV Group, et cetera, et cetera. I ended up with helping the private equity invest into Hollywood studio. But like 4 years ago, we set up content company, XG, so a little bit background. What we do is we produce drama, scripted show, non-scripted show, reality show, like we produce all the MasterChef China version. We also do live concerts in China. So the thing is, I think Jing made a great point that I heard Crazy Rich Asian first time because a friend of mine, whose name is Elon, the CEO of Keshe International, he just randomly called me, "Son, this is huge news. Finally, there's a China-US co-production wing." I said, "I've never heard of this movie, sorry. I don't think it's Chinese. It's not Crazy Rich Chinese." And the truth is, it didn't really work out in in China market, unfortunately. I watched the movie twice. I really liked the movie. But as a local Chinese person, I really get it why it doesn't work for China market. I kind of get that sense. It doesn't connect with domestic market. And the biggest challenge, the biggest change, like Ben has said last year in China for box office, I'll say film market, is that you are starting to see domestic Chinese movie, starting from Wolf Warrior, then to Wandering Earth, making like 3 billion, 4 billion, 6 billion market box office, which is huge. And all these are happening because we are expecting domestic content, and plus a very important macro factor, which is all those like Douyin, like TikTok China version, and Kuaishou, and all these short form things are helping people, not only in like second, third tier cities, but like 5th to like 15th towns, because like 10th tier city in China still have 1 million population, getting direct access to all those things. And the booming of commercial real estate properties, each one has amazing theater. All those like penetration of content into those tier markets help the box office of domestic content to boom. Because China, Beijing plus Guangzhou used to account for like 60% of box office 15 years ago. Right now, it's less than 15. It's probably like 11 to 12%. But like my business, we are all TV. It's drama. And that market boom up like crazy because I invested into SMG Pictures, like a media conglomerate, like 6 years ago. And per episode cost increased 7 times. And the acquisition price increased like 8 times, which is crazy. And it's also very rare that a production company, when we started the business, and we are able to raise close to 1 billion RMB equity, besides all the debt financing provided by my friend. So well-equipped, a super strong balance sheet to produce like 13 drama in just 4 years, and fully financed by ourselves, which is like unbelievable in other territory. And although it's TV content, but we never sold to any TV channel. It's all pure streaming buyers. I literally only have like 3 clients, in China, and keeping your pace up with them is very important because traditional content people move really slow. Because the lead time of our project...
Say that again. Traditional people move really slow.
Business sense-wise. Yeah. Creative-wise, they're like a super fast, like Superman, with all the respect. But I come from the finance world, right? So the lead time of your product, the nature is 12 to 18 months, even sometimes 24. But all these new buyers, content buyers in China, they're internet guys. Sorry, they didn't even touch content like 10 years before. Yeah. That makes a great difference. And that also offers opportunity to new companies like us, formed up by not only industry veterans, but also like finance people and business people to adapt to the market. And that's what I want to share a little bit.
So one of the things you're saying there is there's greater polarization between the super huge Chinese movies, which are capable of earning $500 million at the box office, and then the short form video, which is not even going anywhere near theatrical.
I'm not saying short form video not going anywhere. I'm saying the short form platform, video platform, is like, you can ask Willem, is super important for the marketing and all the P&A stuff for not only movie, but also TV content and all the content. And it's the penetration ratio and the crazy growth. DAU today for TikTok is probably 230 million DAU. Yeah. And that helps any content to have direct access to potential watcher, viewer, ticket buyers.
I mean, TikTok is huge in India also. And there's just this one thing that I just want to say here is that I loved Crazy Rich Asians. And because internet has really erased the borders. So the culture, the pop culture, the films that do well, the information travels through Twitter and through, of course, YouTube, through the digital world. And Indians were putting it out on Twitter, when is Crazy Rich Asians releasing in India? And Warner Brothers on their Twitter handle officially replied, "We are sad to inform it's not going to release in India." And then there was a rage, like, we want this movie, we want to see this in India. And in that entire mix, it actually released 3 months later and did not really do that well. It did not do well, though I strongly feel it would have done very well and would have even, brought in an Asian film into India at that scale, because it was such a film of so much celebration. Is very close to where Bollywood is.
Bennett?
I just wanted to kind of expand on what Sam was talking about, because I think that Sam did a much better job articulating the landscape than what I did, but I kind of gave you like the preface, right? And so you kind of jumped in. So if you look at the economics of content in China, then you can understand, how he directs his company into what they should be making. When you look at movies, even before Wolf Warrior, I mean, if you go a little bit way back, how many movies in China, how many movies in any territory actually make money, actually break even, and what's the cost structure? The cost structure for releasing in China is not that high, especially as compared to the U.S. But even because you don't have the TV spend,
exactly,
or the fake TV spend, which is really a barrier to entry. It's a whole other panel conversation. But for the U.S. But for China, the strength is the low cost to entry. The weakness is you don't have a lot of other windows. So the company that made Crazy Rich Asians, which is SK Global, I believe, right? They make a lot of low budget movies that they could sell international rights to. They could sell, TV rights or streaming rights. And so in China, for your films that you're talking about, so if you're a public company, you're releasing a movie, you have no idea when your movie is going to release, how many weeks you're going to be out, what are you going up against, and can you even sell the streaming rights? Is there going to be value to it that makes any difference? So very, very few films. But when you look at the few films that do break out, they're phenomenal, especially the titles that you've mentioned, and also just over the last national holiday, with The Captain, and before that, Nija, the animated movie. So a lot of companies were shifting into TV dramas, where they were selling to satellite TV stations. You basically were able to make 3 sales. You can sell to 2 satellites, and you can sell your streaming rights. And you pretty much knew exactly how much you were going to make. But it was this area that got overheated, and the satellite TV companies weren't making a lot of money. They were actually losing money, and they became slow payers. Yep. And so that shifted everybody to kind of an easier universe of the streaming, where they have Youku, Tencent, iQIYI, and every now and then somebody else kind of pops up. So that's the economic landscape I think everybody has to deal with. So I think for companies like Xinge with some, that's where they have to figure out: are we making a movie this week? Are we making a TV show? Are we making streaming, going TV drama? So that's just jumping in with that.
You mentioned, go on. Go on.
Yeah, I just want to quickly jump on one of the Bennett's comment on the cost structure of releasing a movie in China. I think it's my firm belief that actually we should be spending a little bit more to remove the low barrier of entry issue that we see in the theatrical world right now. I'm not saying we should be spending as much as the TV media buys in the US, but I think that's a crucial element we are missing. Obviously, we can do it more economically with more data-driven approach.
We'll expand on that, because one of the things that we continually hear is people not understanding what the audience is. We don't know what the Chinese audience is. It's different from what it was 6 months ago, and all these tier 4 and 5 cities have just changed the macro picture anyway. Explain the data analysis here.
Well, I don't think I have the magical box to tell a producer and a studio what the audience want. I think that's wrongly to expect that. But what I think it is true is that not only for marketing, right, but from when you develop a script or when you're trying to greenlight a movie, you should have the right expectation of who your audience is. And nowadays, like the new companies, a lot of our clients are actually the streaming, they only make movies for streaming platforms, right? And their greenlighting process is, I think, a great combination of the Hollywood style, right? But plus a local element touch of the Chinese way of doing business. And a lot of those people actually came from a background of internet and also, banking, and they bring different perspective to it. On the theatrical side, right? I think important to notice what I'm saying is it's become really crucial that you find the right audience to go to the theater in the first weekend, right? And the way of doing that is matching your marketing materials with the right audience. So they go in with the right expectations, so when they come out, the word of mouth is actually positive instead of saying it's a bad thing, right? And I think a lot of mismatching of the marketing and the actual content of the movie contributed to the polarization, way of the Chinese movie market. Either you get more than 600 million box office, or you get 6 million, right? That crucial middle part of the market is missing, and I think the mismatching and not understanding what the audience want is playing a part in that.
But who's got that information? Is it the ticketing companies like Maoyan and Tao?
In a way, they are best equipped to do that. The only way is how they try to use their data.
For the benefit of some people here, is an extraordinary situation in China where you have over 80, perhaps 90% of tickets sold online. India's going that way too. And that's creating data that certain companies have. Those companies in turn have become so embedded that they are becoming distributors. And in fact, some of them are now becoming producers as well, because they've got such a position of power.
I think I'm sorry to interrupt. I think there's a lot of consistency in Chinese audiences in terms of what they like. While yes, I think to really hit the big numbers, you got to get out of the tier 1 cities. You got to play, equally well in tier 4 and tier 5. But I think there's a lot of consistency, which is probably why things kind of bunch up a bit. Why you see, movies that really, really, truly take off. So for that part, on the movie side, I think it's very consistent. The TV shows and streaming, I think there's genres and styles that are really sticking out. My personal favorite is the 24 Hours in Chang'an, which was basically they took, remember the show 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, put it back into like few hundred years ago.
Tang Dynasty.
Thank you very much. All right, she's good with the dynasties. And I just remembered the Blake Carrington of Dynasty. Okay. The joke for three people in the room?
It's too early for this.
Anyway, that show did critically really well and did well. But it's the kind of like the romance shows that really, really knock it out of the box.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to theatrical and streamers, one thing I also noticed that kind of make China a bit different from the US is the diversified sources of content. So we are in Hollywood, so people here only watch Hollywood movies, movie made in the US or was basically spoken in English. But I think Chinese audience actually embrace a much wider, variety of contents. So we talk about local productions, which has been doing very well lately. Of course, we have a lot of imported US movies. And we also have movies from India, from Thailand, from South Korea, from Hong Kong, not technically international territory, but it's a different market. So Chinese audience is more willing to try different things. And a few years ago, when an Indian movie, so excuse my pronunciation, I think it's called Dangal. Dangal, okay. Yeah. It's about wrestling. A father teach his two daughters to become champion. So who would imagine that would beat some high budget, visual effects heavy, blockbuster movies in China market. But it turned out to be one of the most successful movie of that year. And then since then, we have been companies in China has been importing more Indian movies has a very unique angle, focused on society issues or something that just very it can be comedy or can be something reflects society issues. So I think audience there is more willing to try different things, which also create opportunities for both theatrical release and also online streaming release, because they are not necessarily competing. They're actually just share and supplement each other. But looking at the US, because we do produce a lot of movies from studios to independent producers, but it's all English speaking, US movies. So when you see that, it's very natural to feel like streamers are competing with theatrical and then kind of diversify the audience and feel like they're stealing audience away from theater. So if you look at the source, I think it's basically there is not enough content to supplement both channels. And then as a natural result, you will see some audience get loose and then it's they went to streaming platforms.
Maybe we can discuss the streamers now. How are the streamers doing? I mean, you have perhaps two groups. You have the international ones, the Amazons and Netflixes and Facebook, who are enjoying a certain amount of success, blocked from operating in China. But you also have phenomenally large and very powerful local companies, both in China and in India. How are these playing out?
Do you want to take it first?
So Netflix, Amazon came into India and has really boosted the production economy, and there's so much work for everyone. The biggest platform in India is the Star TV platform called Hotstar. Hotstar closed cricket rights and cricket streaming rights. With that, they got a lot of sports audience and of course converted the whole library of Star, the major TV, and Hotstar enjoys it's 10x than everyone else Hotstar is between 90 million subscribers. And Netflix, Amazon are beginning out, spreading their, Netflix just came out with a mobile version of, a cheaper version of their app, which has really taken off very well. And also now subtitling, dubbing all the content in various Indian languages. So you see all of that happening. Also India's biggest shopping giant like Flipkart, which was bought over by Walmart, which is like the Amazon of India. Flipkart, which merged with Walmart, is just coming out with their video platform, and that is launching over the next month. So then there are so many other smaller players. There's the other digital players. They're all bullying out content.
Some of them are not very small. I mean, when you look at Alt Balaji or Eros, they're considered as small players, but they have 20 million plus paying subscribers.
More than, they have anywhere from 20 million to 30 million subscribers. But paying subscribers, engaged subscribers, and that's the power of India, of various languages, of we said that even in in the fourth tier also there are 10 million people. And that's how I think India, China is half the world.
And in China, you have three very large generalist players, but you also have...
know them extremely well, so I better shut up because I'm the biggest client. But I mean, speaking for them, telling something good about them is that I think adding up all their acquisition budget together, 3 of them, Youku, Tencent, and iQIYI, and sometimes right now we also have Mango TV, like catching up with Youku. So adding their acquisition budget together equals probably Netflix annual acquisition budget.
Wow.
And the other thing is I want to share is because we were talking about P&A costs, now the whole China market, not only TV but also movie, is getting a turning point because every single streaming platform claims they have like 90 to 100 million subscribers. And adding 3 altogether, we cut off like the overlap. I will say it's about 200 million, but you can never figure out it's monthly subscriber, quarterly, or annually, semi-annually. And on November 11th, Double 11, which is coming in a few days, you can buy all the annual membership for half the price. So subscription fee for the first time surpassed their advertising income. But what I want to say is that 4 years ago when I launched our show, but by the way, the average budget of TV is actually more than movie. So our company's sweet spot is like 150 to 350 million RMB, something like that. And total P&A cost is about 20% of the production budget. But some part you will just not notice because we sold to streaming players. They dedicated their resources, which should have a price, to the promotion of all those things. But when you reach a subscriber basis of 200 million, what is changing is that you are including people not only in Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen again. It's also people in like the 10th tier towns and villages. They're also watching. So we claim to be like a premium content provider in China, but give me the new definition of premium content if there are like 200 million viewers instead of just 20 million 5 years ago.
Those are just the big 3, and you mentioned Mango as well, make 4. But what about the short form companies as well?
Short form, I mean, actually my company, we hired a former chief content officer of ByteDance.
Yeah.
Because ByteDance has been seriously studying content market for years. It's a struggle for them whether to penetrate into relatively long form market to increase the user stickiness or not. But ultimately, we found it's wrong. Many people were guessing who's ByteDance really competing against, Tencent, social media. But ultimately, we found out like the live broadcasting, live streaming on ByteDance, meaning it's hitting Alibaba for e-commerce. And what could continuous black hole sucking capital just to buy content generating no profit help ByteDance? Because I met the chairman and founder, he's like super rational, just engineer. And they're very, very super rational. And it has become a super important marketing channel for all the content. Look at those content that Will Smith is willing to do by promoting Gemini in China. The first thing he do is creating a TikTok account and playing those double roles and suiting ByteDance, TikTok's format.
And some of those companies are now of a significance that they're also venturing into their own production. I mean, I believe that Bilibili is actually doing co-production with National Geographic.
Yeah, Bilibili is all about like, I know them extremely well. We're both in Shanghai. They are buying a lot of international content, and they are also very strict player. I mean, I highly recommend its stock. and because it's profitable.
This is not an offer to
kidding, but they're so vertical and very strict on content acquisition. They don't jump into some drama or crazy reality show randomly.
There's like 3 little fun facts here. Okay, so one, in China with the top 3 streamers, only 2 of them really have to, only one of them really has to make money.
Yeah.
Right, and so the playing field is not exactly, even. iQIYI has the most pressure because they're not owned by Alibaba or Tencent. Second thing, if you come back here to the U.S., where everybody now has a subscription video on demand service, so many, they're happening, and they're paying big dollars for comedies, existing comedies in library to attract folks to want to subscribe. But Americans, on average, they'll pay for 2.5 subscriptions. And there's not room for everybody. And so it's going to be interesting how this plays out here because a lot of them are going to suffer. Amazon is probably interestingly positioned because they don't actually have to make content because you're going to go to them to buy stuff anyway for like that side. Netflix is probably the most scared right now because their content is limited, versus the studios who have a lot more depth. And then third thing, because you mentioned this, I was thinking while you're talking about like ByteDance, Bilibili, also I think iQIYI, I think they're all listed on NASDAQ, if my memory is correct here. And on Wall Street these days, there's been the attack of the unicorn. Either before you go public or right after you go public, with a big push for when are you going to be profitable, which I think everybody but Amazon has to subscribe to, I guess, in essence. And so in China, I follow, ByteDance and Bilibili closely because they're very innovative. Yeah. And, some of their platforms do extremely well here in the U.S. But, at the end of the day, everybody needs to become this kind of full-service content platform that, at least I think in China, Tencent and Alibaba are so well positioned, it's kind of hard to compete long-term with that.
Can I turn to you for a moment for a little bit of analysis on Jio? This is a company backed by India's largest industrial conglomerate. It has rolled out broadband mobile internet everywhere, meaning some people have become TV households where they never even were before. It has enabled the streamers to come in. It's enabled the local streamers to do well, but it's also competing against them. It's now setting up its own content business as well. I mean, explain.
It's very interesting. So Jio, yes, of course, has rolled out the internet service and mobile and has the most amazing marketing power for the movies they do because they have Jio mobiles and Jio plans, which are so cheap, they've crashed the internet market and got billions of people on it. In fact, Jio has constantly been changing their content strategy. They did come in the market very aggressively and giving deals to every producer and buying out everyone, and also bought out other companies like Viacom India put a stake in that, Eros, Balaji, Alt, and then set up their own studio. So in the recent phase, they are now moving more towards movies and more acquisitions and releasing those because they have so much of soft power. And they're scaling back on shows because they also understand that their service is anyways being used by everyone else and being enabled about. But yes, Jio is a huge, huge superpower which has arrived and is surfacing. They don't really have a show that right now is greenlit or is going to get produced, but they have been thinking about it. They're rolling back on shows and moving more on movies.
We've got limited time, but I mean, India is an example where you've got the Indian companies competing against the American companies and to some extent the Chinese companies. When are we going to see more competition in other markets, other Asian markets perhaps, but other international markets as well, between the Indian companies, the Chinese companies, and the American companies?
They're all there already in Southeast Asia.
In Southeast Asia. We're beginning to see Tencent and iQIYI in particular rolling out, but explain more.
I mean, the fastest growth region for Tencent streaming was in Southeast Asia, Thailand, and all those countries, and launched a slightly different name of their streaming service. And in my view, I've shared this view for years, that I think China, whatever co-production, might never become a mainstream in the Western world, but we should be thinking about regional content. Because Southeast Asia market is so huge with the population. The main driver is not how big Chinese people living in those areas, but that territory has been used to watch Northeast Asian content, starting from Japanese content today to Korean content. And the Korean, Japanese, plus today with our budget range at Chinese content, it's high quality content in Asia. And somehow Southeast Asian are very used to accepting cultures right there in Japan, Korea, and China. So the future, I think a near-term future for our co-production will be regional content, and Southeast Asia could be very, very important market for China content industry.
I just picked up the remake rights of Signal, Korea's #1 show. And the concept of shows has been so huge in India So the IP is extremely valuable.
Signal?
Signal, yeah. And the ByteDance team was all in India discussing further rollouts and meeting entrepreneurs. And last week we had sat down with Suchiko from Japan. So it's a conversation that's beginning to happen.
Yeah. And also just equal to that is I think not only Tencent but also iQIYI, they're really investing, figure out their strategy in Southeast Asia and how the regional content strategy is going to be, debating whether we do local language production or, focus on the premium Chinese language, but with a more regional angle to the pattern. And TikTok obviously is, I think, in India the fastest growing
huge
thing. So I think the competition is already there.
Thank you very much indeed. This was a bit of a cold start and a bit difficult to follow Kevin Rudd, but I think we've done quite well. Thank you very much. Many insights. There are clearly at least 2 elephants in the room.
Thank you.
Thank you all. You did a very good job following Kevin Rudd. And just a quick housekeeping thing now. So we have I think it's a 15-minute break on the calendar. We're cutting it to 5 just in the interest of, we have made up some time, and thank you for your discipline, Patrick, much appreciated. So it's a 5-minute break. You can bring coffee and drink and whatever you'd like back in here. The next panel at the top of the hour is Binge Frenzy, and you're not going to want to miss it. So see you shortly. Thank you. way to enforce, and of course that wasn't really a 5-minute break, but to enforce it a little bit is to actually start, even if the folks are not back in the room, and maybe we'll impose some discipline in the afternoon. But welcome back to the Summit programming. And the title for the next conversation is really pretty self-explanatory, I think. Binge Frenzy, Streaming a Diversity of Content. And not long ago, when the word binge was used in a sentence, it usually had to do with eating or drinking too much. Now, of course, binge has connotations that take us to the worlds of Netflix or Hulu or HBO or Disney or pick your platform. To get this panel going for us, please welcome our next moderator, a partner at Manat, Phelps and Phillips, Lindsay Connor. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Can you all hear me okay? All right, nobody yelling about that. Well, my panel didn't follow me up, so maybe we'll, you know what, we'll do this like we're at Staples Center. Ed Gard from Ed Gard from UCLA, number 25.
I wanted to join you in the end.
All right.
A dramatic entry. Yes.
All right. So let me introduce the panel, because it really is a fantastic panel who can offer a lot of interesting insights and represents a lot of interesting folks. So I'm going to do it from your left to right. I think it just makes it a little easier. So on your left, Victor Yip, who is Vice President of Digital Media Distribution and Direct-to-Consumer and International at the Walt Disney Company. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you.
Next to him is Daniel Cohan. Daniel is a feature agent at ICM Partners, which, if there's anybody in this room who is not from Hollywood, ICM is one of the most powerful talent agencies in Hollywood. And welcome, Daniel. Next to Daniel is Katie Sue, who is Senior Vice President of Growth Marketing at Warner Media. Welcome. Welcome, Katie. And sitting next to me, Annie Luo, who is Senior Vice President of Business Development and Operations at Hulu. So we have Hulu, we have HBO Max, we have Disney represented. Now, just to be clear, Victor is not from the Disney Plus side. Victor is from the window before that. We'll get into that in a minute. Victor is from the direct-to-consumer TVOD part. And then Daniel is one of the people steering projects through in this mass creation of content that we have going on right now. So let's get started. Journalists, and we have a few of them, a few very fine ones here today. Journalists have been talking about streaming wars as though this is a major conflict, political or military. It sounds like a sequel to Star Wars. But in fact, one could look at it somewhat more benignly as a technology-enhanced way to give consumers what they want in the most effective and efficient way possible. So let's go to the $64 billion question. What do consumers in North America want? And to the extent you are willing to share it, what are you doing to give us what consumers want? Anybody, feel free to jump in.
I think, one of the things that is really important when you think about streaming is this idea that audiences have an expectation ingrained in them. They want to see the best content that they want discovery to be easy. And a lot of what we're focusing on is how do you elevate the right stories to the right audiences? How do you make the messaging relevant to them? The mic keeps going up and down, sorry. But I think what's really important too to think about is the discovery experience in an app. And this is not just isolated to HBO Max. I was at Hulu before. A lot of the issues you experience today is you're inundated with choice and selection, and you know, sometimes at an audience, you want to discover something quickly and watch it, and you are not able to. And so one of the things we hope to do is, on the curation side, truly provide this concept of recommended by humans that you guys may have seen in the trades. And a lot of that is this editorial approach that will allow you to find the things to fall in love with faster and more seamlessly.
I just build off that. I can speak to what at Hulu we think our subscribers want. I think people come to Hulu because of the breadth of content, right? And you can say that's not unique to Hulu. They come for the price as well, right? They're also looking for affordable services. They want originals and exclusives, though interestingly, we have discovered that that wasn't really the top reason for a lot of people to sign up for us. They really just wanted price and breadth, right? If I look at the next 6 months, by April 2020, you're going to have 4 new services being launched, right? And they're all bankrolled by mega cap companies. So that's Apple, that's HBO Max, that's Disney Plus, and that's
Peacock?
Peacock. Let's not forget. Interesting name, but let's not forget them. And all of them have a plan to be bundled essentially for free for the consumer, at least for a year. So speaking of choices, as you know, Katie has just mentioned, I think consumers will be overwhelmed by choices, right? And there is a contradiction of the consumer as well, right? They want everything cheaply, and they want everything also personalized and somehow sort of just for them. So to solve for those somewhat contradictory needs, I think it's a bit of a challenge for all of us. But at the end of the day, it's great news for the consumer. You know, a ton of content, a lot of them for free, and potentially delivered at a personalized experience, powered by AI and enhanced by human curation, right? So the consumer wins.
So speaking of the breadth of content that's going to be out in the market so HBO Max is launching next year, summer of next year, right? But I think more than anything, consumers want clarity of content, right? Where are they going to find what they want to watch? And that's something that Disney has really gravitated towards as far as our strategy, you know, in terms of the brand pillars, that if you go to disneyplus.com, it's very clear that our strategy is to focus on the brands that consumers know and they recognize. So that's Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, Nat Geo, right? And Pixar. So we believe that as long as people have that history and the legacy with the content of those brands, that they get more clarity and they can go to our platform and really understand and watch what they love, right? And so hopefully that gives what consumers want in terms of clarity and you know, again, gravity towards the things that they love from before.
So Daniel, quick follow-up. 3 of our speakers are from platforms that are providing the content directly to end users, but you're one of the people who's involved in the creation of this content, and you have to guess in advance what consumers are going to want a year or 2 down the road. What do you see consumers want?
I think that the most exciting development that we've seen over the past few years, it's the proliferation of original content and just the creation of something for everyone. And in some ways, you've got the throwing the spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. But I think with both human recommendations and algorithm-based, you know, Netflix has their Van Damme technology, which apparently designs what your own homepage will look like, and I think versions of those exist with each of the streaming services. So from the salesperson side of the fence, we are charged with having something for everyone and identifying new voices and underrepresented voices and playing a bit of mix and match. So for us, the sky's the limit.
So we spoke about how much content is being created. If it's spaghetti thrown against the wall, it's a lot of pasta. We understand, you know, we're told Netflix is spending $13 billion this year and maybe $15 billion next year. Apple is supposed to be spending $2 billion this year. And this is a $1.1 trillion company. So it's not like they got to worry if they're going to spend 3 or 4 or 5 billion. Each of your companies is spending so much money on content. And there's going to be a lot of it. There's more content out there than ever before. Does that allow a greater diversity of voices to be heard? And if the answer to that is yes, how do you connect that diversity of voices with the consumers who may be interested in hearing them, or maybe who don't even know about them and need to be sort of connected to them? How do you enable that diversity to be meaningful more than in a production sense, but in an actual connection to consumers? Anyone
Happy
wants
to take a
jump in?
stab at it. I know you
Sure.
probably have a lot to say as well. So Hulu's mission is to captivate and connect people with powerful stories. So to answer your question, I think I'm going to share kind of a personal story. My daughter, we just moved from New York to LA 3 months ago, so my daughter is trying to make friends at school. So she met this new friend who has 2 dads, right? So she came home and she asked me a lot of questions that only a 7-year-old could ask, and I'm not going to repeat here. But they were interesting questions, right? Made you think, like, how do I talk to her about this, right? I have gay friends, but we've never had gay friends who had kids at her age, right? Around the same time, Hulu had commissioned an original. It's an animated series called The Bravest Knight. It was adapted from a book. Sorry about the Hulu plugging here, but I'm passionate about this story.
That's okay. No.
The Bravest Knight is about 2 dads, one sort of pumpkin farmer turned knight and a prince. And they have an adopted daughter called Nia, who was training to be a knight, right? It's a beautiful story, beautifully animated. I encourage you to all watch and sign up for Hulu. But the punchline of the story is that I told Zoe, my daughter, to watch the show. At home, we only watch Hulu because when your mom works for Hulu, you don't have any choices. Sorry for her. So she watches, right? And she loves the show. And then she said, you know what? I'm going to tell Pilar about this. I'm going to ask her to watch it too. So for me, that was, I wouldn't say it's an aha moment, but it was a proud moment, right? Because when I do media strategy at Hulu, when you do Excel and charts and pie charts and this and that, you don't really kind of know what is the purpose of what I do and the mission of Hulu, right? So that did connect for me at that moment that, yes, these types of stories, may not have gotten produced if there weren't for companies like HBO Max or Disney Plus or Hulu. Not to say that broadcast networks wouldn't take the risk, but there's definitely a lot more space, a lot more investment, a lot more platform out there for these types of stories to be told. And to be able to have my daughter watch that and have her tell her friends about it, I think it was an incredible moment. So.
I think from my perspective, I would take a step back and almost provide like a personal view on it as well. I think all of us here, supporting Asia Society, obviously diverse stories and diverse content is very important to all of us. And so when you bring that sensibility to a project, regardless of whether or not it's HBO Max, Disney, or Hulu, there is a desire to make the best content for the right community and the right audiences so that there's a certain authenticity there that you cannot compromise. And so, a while ago, I was on another streaming service and I was served an Asian tile. And I remember seeing it and going, God, I wonder why I just got served that piece of content, because I don't typically discover Korean content or Asian content for that matter. And, I thought, oh, I wonder if it's my last name that triggered the search. I have no idea. But you think about all these things because you as a consumer are first and foremost, right? We do what we do because it's for the fan. But the fan comes in various types and backgrounds and cultures, and you have to know that in order to market to them and give them what they want. And so I was going through this experience, and I felt kind of like, man, that's such a bummer. Like, why did I get served an Asian show that I don't watch? And then 68 episodes later, I was like, oh my God. I feel like they understand me, or they allowed me to discover a story that I would have otherwise never found on my own. But in that is a very important thread, which is, I think all of us here who touch content, who touch streaming, have such a responsibility to surface and service content for people who are looking for them, who may not have discovered it, who may not have, understood that this is a story that would be important to them. And I always reference Crazy Rich Asians. One of the things that I'm the most proud of, having been at Warner Brothers during that era, was the fact that we made a story about Asian families that was just normal. It was a love story you could relate to. It was completely outside of the norm of any sort of stereotypes. And you learned about the culture. It was a window in, but it was emotional, you connected, and it normalized it. And so when I think about streaming, regardless of what company I'm at, the most important thing is that you are curating for diverse cultures and backgrounds and thought, because that's the only thing that matters today. We have so much choice, and to Annie's point, the consumers and fans are winning. Like, they're going to be able to pick what they want. So it's our job to ensure that the stories that we all make and want to tell in this room get serviced to them.
And you almost have to surface that special story and special content now, right? Because there is so much content and it's so competitive. So if we raise the lens a little bit to look at how the Asia streaming market is developing, right? So back in the day, iQIYI, which is, dubbed the Netflix of China, et cetera, there were kind of a lot of Hollywood content, some local content, but they discovered that that was doing just okay, right? And it was important that they started looking at the local content. How do you get the local production and the local producers involved and telling those stories, right? So they started seeking high and low for those stories, and they were looking at books and old literature and tales from mythic times to develop these stories. And it was really until 2015 when they discovered, I think it was Lost Tomb or one of those stories, very culturally relevant to China, to Asia, and then The Rap of China, right? It was a very locally based, culturally relevant story that their subscriptions took off. Right? So in terms of the intensity of content, the diversity of content, because they're fighting so hard to win eyeballs and subscriptions and ARPU, revenue per user, that these stories have to get elevated. And you're getting all the cream of the crop servicing to the top because of the streaming wars. And I think that's a great thing.
So let me push you a little bit, all of you, on this point. You produce content. You're right. I mean, objectively, there's something like 500 to 600 television shows. Television, I put in quotes because what's television is sort of a fluid term in a way that it wasn't before. We used to know what film was and what television was, and now there's kind of features and series and limited series, but it doesn't break down the same way. But there's more of those series than ever before. There's a profusion of content. So more voices are able to be heard. So how do we connect, going back to the connection issue, how do we connect the content with the audience? Is it curation that the platforms, are going to do? Is it old-fashioned publicity and promotion? Does that play a role the way it used to when most of us were growing up? Is it social media? And is that social media that you drive, or are you relying on audiences, in effect, to bring each other to the set? Or is there a fourth that I'm not even mentioning? But how do you make that connection between the content you have and have paid so much for and the people who are out there?
I mean, I think there's an element of editorial for sure. I think some of the best streaming services or even products that we all use today on your phone, the curation is a key part of it. So I do think that enhances discovery and the user experience overall. And in general, I think, all of the channels for marketing still exist. There's no, it's not non-traditional versus traditional. It's just the way we as consumers and fans, even on this panel, how we experience content. So as long as we are able to find people where they are and give them something that they care about, I think that's the key.
I do think that your brand has to stand for something, right? Take Disney as an example, and this is in the public arena. Their product hasn't yet launched, Disney Plus hasn't yet launched, and there are a lot of people, let's just say a lot of people who've already signed up for it, right, in the pre-sale. So when people come to Disney Plus, they know what they can expect, right? And they will come no matter what amount of algorithm you're going to throw at them or human curation, they will just come because it's Disney Plus. It's similar to Apple, right? Now I digress a bit. Like every time they ship a new device, there are millions of people who will buy it. And you know that you don't need a Wall Street analyst to tell you, right? 2 to 3 million people will get an Apple phone. And similar for us at Hulu, we think about what we stand for, right? What does a brand stand for apart from all this content, next day shows and originals? The brand has to stand for something for you to be able to stand out and make that connection to the viewer, in addition to all these, activation marketing channels you could always use and optimize to make that sort of engagement, to engage that consumer to win their decision moments, so to speak.
I think Annie is right in that too. You know, as a brand, you have to be emotionally arresting. You have to connect and bring fans in, and a lot of times the show is just the entry point, right? It brings you into the experience, but over time, you know, that's why people will gravitate towards these brands that are meaningful in their life, is because they represent something larger than just the brand itself. So there is some truth in that. I feel that too. It's fun, yeah.
I think right now it's absolutely fascinating, just with the bundling that is occurring with the new platforms that are now coming out, with Apple just released, and they are in a unique position because they don't have the hundreds of thousands of minutes of content that is available. That might account for the lower price point, but what they are trying to make up for with the lack of the minutes would be in quality. And I think that overall trend in the marketplace, and one that we on the sales side have to be so cognizant of at all moments, is in being tip of the spear and predicting where to place content. And we're seeing with almost like a talent arms race starting to occur, and overall deals being struck between all of the major streamers and the biggest showrunner creator talent, which is fantastic. But I think that with the diversity available, we're going to see that really pushed it to a premium. And this is very interesting now with companies like Disney having the massive library. They know that if you have kids, you're going to want to have your Disney Plus, watching your Pixar, if you watch the people who've grown up with Star Wars. And I think that is exciting, but that's sort of puts companies like Amazon and Apple at a disadvantage. I mean, we're seeing with Netflix losing The Office and losing Friends. Those are their two most viewed shows. They're making up for it with additional original programming, and that's opportunity for us. And so yes, it's wonderful that the diversity of voices get to go out there. It's not so often that you create a binge-worthy show, you know, something like Stranger Things. And I think that Netflix is so reliant upon addictive programming, and in a way that Apple is not, in a way that Hulu has not yet been, but could potentially, that will be an opportunity for them to fill. I mean, the last time we had a Game of Thrones type show, it's been 8 years, right? And what has replaced that for that market? So.
Let me ask a cut against the grain question, because everything is all flowing in the direction of curation and streaming and all of this. And sometimes, you know, things evolve, and the world has to evolve with it. Fresh Off the Boat is a show from ABC. And one of the unique advantages, if you manage to get through the gatekeepers and be on a national network, is that your show is not only going to be seen by the people who know they want to watch it, who would be curated to because of what they've watched before, but people who are just watching a network, who may discover a show, may discover a culture that they would not have otherwise seen before. Is anyone worried, Daniel, I'm focusing on you talking to the talent, is anyone worried that we're going to lose that ability in this very curated world, that we're going to lose the ability to have people who aren't in the predictive fan base able to discover new things?
I actually think what Katie was saying was really interesting about something that was thought to be directed towards you and actually did strike. There's an element of luck to it. I mean, I find myself, I go to Asia quite a bit for work, and I scratch my head and wonder how new things end up in my queue, or hey, because you like this, you should try watching this. And I'm not worried about it. I'm actually pretty robust and confident that with the additional choices, those cultural offerings will be discovered, you know, be it from India or, I mean, just to speak of the Asian market, like in iQIYI and Tencent, they're now really focused on original programming. Now, the naysayer in you may say, well, that's just because they want opportunities for brand integration and sponsorship and ads just to be seen by more eyeballs. But I actually feel like that there is a legitimate desire to deliver a quality product for not just the local market, but for international. And in the U.S., we're seeing just with the rise of of Korean cinema. I mean, certainly now this year with a movie like Parasite, very well positioned to win, if not one, several Academy Awards. The rise of K-drama in a similar vein, it's now being discovered outside of just a traditional Korean population. So I'm really encouraged.
Let's widen the lens a little bit and look at streaming in the context of the larger entertainment world. And I'm going to look to Victor first, but everyone else can jump in on this. In the tech world, Windows refers to a key part of the Microsoft empire. But in the entertainment world, Windows has traditionally referred to the release pattern of content, where content went to theaters first, and then pay-per-view, TVOD as we call it today, and the like, and then some form of digital distribution, and then pay television, free television. We had these windows. Has streaming busted all of those windows? What's left of Windows? And to the extent the windows are busted, do you see streaming as being complementary or competitive to the traditional markets?
I mean, it's clear that windows are under extreme scrutiny at this point, and it makes sense, right? Because we talked about what consumers want, we talked about the content side of things, but on the business side, in an on-demand world, they want their content, we want our content now and as fast as possible. And obviously on the television side of the business, it's a little bit more diverse in terms of the windowing, but on the film side, it's still very regimented, as you mentioned, from theatrical all the way down to free TV. But Netflix still has, 25, 30, 35 of the viewing hours on movies. So it's still an important part of the business. But getting back to your question, it hasn't busted the system. I mean, our CEO, Bob Iger, has gone out and said right now we're going to maintain the sanctity of the transactional window, which is the business that I'm in right now. But we're going to look at it, right? I think ultimately there needs to be flexibility around what do the consumers want, how do we adapt, right? And I think the key that I see as we look at this is what are the key operating pillars that we got to think about as we look at windows, and how do we, compress or move closer towards theatrical? And I think there's a few things. The first one is, they can't be what we call a dark zone, because right now, movies in the theaters, and then there could be a period of 2 months where you don't get it on demand yet, right? I think that has got to go, right? I mean, right now, the only people that's making money at that point is pirates, and it's very clear. The second is, I think there's got to be a mass amount of content, mass amount of studios, production companies, directors, producers that support moving the windows up, because there's participations involved, there's rights involved. It's very complicated, right? And so that's got to work. And I think third, there's got to be enough distributors that are out there that are supporting this, including theatrical exhibitors that want to support this business, because ultimately I think it's complementary, right? Because consumers, if they're getting what they want, and they're becoming more avid consumers of our content, and Katie and I were just talking earlier, our competition isn't each other, right? Our competition is other forms of content. It's games, it's social media, it's time with your family, right? And so if we can make our entertainment product that much better, that much more value added, and not, when am I going to get Avengers? When am I going to get, name that title? The clearer it is where they're going to find it, when they're going to get it, the better value proposition the product is going to be. So I think that's what ultimately is going to drive, the flexibility, if there is any, around Windows.
So we have, my mind goes to an old ad of there was a woman on top of the Transamerica Tower, and King Kong is up there grabbing at her and smashing stuff, and she says at the end, "Who's going to pay for all this, you big monkey?" And it was a great ad. But all this stuff has to be paid for, right? None of this is a charitable endeavor. And the two big models, though there's variations on the theme, are the transactional model, and that's not just the TVOD that Victor's involved in. I mean, essentially going to a movie theater is a transactional model. You pay $10, $15, whatever it is, to see that movie. So there's the transactional model, paying for a piece of content. And then the second model, which is a subscription model, where you don't pay for a piece of content, you pay for the right to subscribe to one of these services. There's also, I should have said, a third model, which is advertising supported, which is historically television. Do any of you see these as, I mean, do you see these as all complementary, that they'll all continue to exist and support some of the content? Or do you see one or two of these forms of who's going to pay for all this coming to the fore?
Not in its current form. It's not sustainable. I mean, if you're looking at just broadcast television, and it's startling how the viewership numbers have been halved just in a matter of under 5 years. And I share a very similar perspective, and I do feel with all the streamers, they are complementary. And if you look at even like last year's box office in North America, it was roughly $12 billion, despite the fact that Netflix on its own released somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 original movies. So I am encouraged, and I think with that choice just comes the adaptive viewing patterns, and sure, having lower cost content available for families, but that also in turn requires theaters and exhibitors to really look at their own business models, and within the traditional 90-day viewing window, that will and is very likely changing. I think it's certainly been in the news cycle now with a movie like The Irishman, which is a $150 million+ Martin Scorsese film, and having a Netflix imposed, they got in an arm wrestling match with exhibitors wanting to show the film exclusively for more than 45 days, and Netflix drew their line in the sand, and it ended up being a much shorter window. And I think, though, pointing to a movie like Roma last year, which won 3 Oscars and was exclusively in theaters for, I think, 3 weeks. There's opportunity there. It's not going to be for everything. And just as when I'm selling to the various streamers, we are now hearing for the first time whether something may or may not be destined for theatrical. And just in the last week and a half, in setting something up with the House of Mouse, something that would, in my mind, be a no-brainer theatrical. The studio wants the ability to dictate whether or not it will end up being with Disney+. And sure, just in the deal-making itself, things like streaming buyouts and the lack of back end and no box office to point to, those are all things that need to be calibrated. But just in terms of opportunity to hit on this, what I was saying, the diversity of voices, having the opportunity to sell more into the system, just the numbers change a bit, and you just need to be smart about your deal making.
So obviously I can't speak to the economics of theatrics, but back to sort of the economics or business models of the streaming world. I mean, to your point, there are 3 business models, right? Some of us play in both, right? And I believe HBO Max right now is SVOD, but potentially AVOD as well. Hulu is both subscription, meaning SVOD, but also we have an ad-supported business model, which does give us a little bit more flexibility, right? And a bit of room in that economic world. It's an interesting question when you said, like, who is going to pay for this? I wonder that myself every day, you know. People talk about peak TV, but I feel like, you know, it just keeps peaking, and it's going to be like Mount Everest TV one day, you know, because content costs just keep going up, and you are not only charging consumer more, you're actually making it free, right, in all kinds of bundles. So the economics are an interesting question to talk about and discuss, and I don't think any of us here would reveal our, you know, business secrets as to how we make the math work. But ultimately, like you are thinking about this in the broader context of pay TV, right? So yes, streaming is sort of all the rage, but ultimately we are looking at cord cutting as well, right? So you will have 20 million subscribers essentially cutting their cable TV, and those people will come into the streaming world. So it's not a zero-sum game over here that the streaming companies are playing, right? And we are swimming with the tide rather than against the tide, if you will. And between subscription and ad-supported models, I believe that the economics will get better, right? And hopefully peak TV will normalize and stop peaking for a while. And we'll figure it out. But I thought it was a really interesting question that I haven't talked about at panels recently. So, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of us out there who are thinking about it.
Right.
because at the end of the day, when you look at the expense that all of you are going to, well, one of you is the immediate beneficiary of it, or clients are the immediate beneficiary of it, but everyone is spending so much, and so much great content is being produced, but at the end of the day, this is not like the Medicis, commissioning great art in Italy, so there'll be more great art, right? At the end, it has to have a commercial purpose. And it's going to be fascinating in the coming years to see how we, the consumers, pay for this largesse of content by which model works. Let's talk a little bit about, I don't want to sound like a history teacher saying compare and contrast, be brief, give specifics, but is the Asian, for those of you who are in the Asian market, is the Asian streaming market evolving similarly to the U.S., or do you see a difference between how North America is evolving and how Asia is evolving?
I'll take a stab at that. We talked a little bit about the local content, right, and how Aichi has developed that way. I see it going even further down that path of being local, and this is not just China. I mean, China in particular, given how popular local content has been, how much success Tencent, Aichi, and others have had with local content, I think it's going to continue investment down that path. But obviously, everybody knows about the trade war that's sort of that's going on right now. That's impacted content import in China as well. So that's going to slow down foreign content getting into China. But if you think about, again, the rest of Asia, India, for example, Bollywood is hugely popular. And they kind of mix that business up. So there's Hotstar, right, the subscription business out there. They mix it with sport. You get cricket as part of your subscription, which is huge. So I think a lot of diversity outside of just scripted content and non-scripted, but sports is going to be part of how Asia will develop. And I think we're going back to the Windows conversation, the difference. I mean, a lot of parts of Asia, and this impacts our business, of course, are already going pretty early in their windows, right? So Korea was a market that I was involved with for a long time, where they are launching transactional video on demand concurrently with theatrical. And that's Hollywood content, right? And it was a huge business for Fox. I was at Fox previously. And for other studios that participated in that as well. But for even the local content in India and Korea, they're releasing television series and movies, feature films, day and date with theatrical. That's pretty bold, but it's a big business. And I think, is that a sign for how things are going to happen in North America? No idea, right? But again, because participations, rights, royalties, all those things are different, in parts of the Western world. But I think if there's any indication about where opportunity is with local content, with windowing, I think that Asia has some very interesting data points.
We're running close to our time, but I want to ask this question for whoever is willing to weigh in on it. We often hear about organizations, particularly in a technology-driven world and in a globalized world, about this organization or that company is so nimble. Nimble is one of the great compliments that people give to organizations. And yet, the production of this amount of content and the curation and distribution of it requires enormous financial resources. And the people getting into or already in the streaming business are big companies with the level of resources necessary to make good on their commitment to consumers. The question is, when you've got that much expenditure in very big companies, how do you stay nimble? How do you stay flexible? What can you do in a rapidly changing world to position yourself for success or be ready to make a change? Daniel, you look like you have a thought on this.
Oh, well.
You're in the nimble category because you're at an agency that can be a little more nimble than a giant.
Sure. But I think that just speaking from the talent side of things, there is quite a bit of flexibility that the streamers offer that traditional film, for example, does not, which is why we're seeing A-level talent at the actor level on down sprinting to the streamers, because both for if you're Michael Bay and you want to make a $150+ million tentpole movie like he's done with Six Underground coming out in December. Like that is not maybe a film that was as obvious for a bigger studio, and they were able to put together a big cast with Ryan Reynolds and others. And I think on the television side, we're now seeing A-level actors wanting to be part of limiteds and minis, and they're not playing by the same rules of broadcast television. They're able to 5 episodes, 3 episodes, 8 episodes, 12. The seasons don't necessarily have to come back within a year. So that level of flexibility offered by the streamers is overwhelmingly enticing, I think. So for us, seeing those opportunities and dealing with movie stars who had no interest in television 5 years ago, compare that to where it is now, it's astonishing.
So I take a stab, and then you guys can chime in too. So I think, to your question about nimble, I think I might sort of come back to say, like, we need to stay focused, right? And I think that's where having a clear mission and vision, right, know your customer promise is very important. Especially, is probably more important when you can be easily distracted, right, by competition or by new product features or new innovations, and what do we do with 5G? All of those questions. So I think about this as sort of an opportunity for us to really be able to articulate what does Hulu's customer promise is, what is our vision and strategy, and really stay focused and follow through.
It's interesting because it may offer something that Hollywood hasn't seen before. I mean, I can remember when there were 2 volcano movies coming out from studios at the same time. You get the sense that somebody, I won't name studios, somebody at Studio A said, Studio B has a volcano movie. We have to have a volcano movie too. And literally 2 volcano movies came out within like 3 months of each other. And people said, well, they're like sheep. They're all, if they think an idea is good, everybody's going to follow it. But what I'm hearing from some of the folks here today is you want to go in a different direction and be brand conscious and stand for something and not necessarily do what everybody else is doing.
The only thing I'll add to this, and I've been in the subscription-based business for a while now, and the one thing that is consistent is change. We live in an ever-evolving technology landscape. Competitors will emerge all the time. Your audiences are changing, behaviors are changing. You were just saying, like, consumption patterns are changing. And so to stay focused on the goal to deliver the best-in-class experience, programming, product to your fans is the priority. And it's regardless of what category or industry you're in. We all happen to be in entertainment and we're focusing on streaming services. But regardless of what that is, that may evolve very quickly. The way people experience streaming and video content may evolve. And I think that's what's exciting about what we do. Yeah. I agree, it opens up so much opportunity and flexibility. But as long as we stay focused that the core is to elevate incredible, heartwarming stories to the right people, elevate diversity, elevate culture, and you bring that to the forefront of what it is that we do, the brand will follow. The pieces that matter to all of us here follow. And as long as we're all able to deliver against that, I think we will have an opportunity to redefine the marketplace.
That's a great closing note. We've had the opportunity today to hear from key players in the companies and organizations that are shaping the content that is going to be produced and delivered to all of us. I think it's been very insightful, and I'd like to express my appreciation to this terrific panel. Please join me.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And Janet Yang, turn it back to you.
Thank you. I'll let you exit stage while we introduce the next speaker. Thank you all so much. I find every panel so fascinating. Every speaker is fantastic. I wish we had more time. I wish we had a week to spend with all of you, but we don't. And we want to get you to lunch. And I'm sorry we don't have time for Q&A and everything. So a lot of apologies from me right now. But I'm not going to apologize for our next speaker. I'm very, very proud to introduce Wei Zhang, president of Alibaba Pictures. Let's sit over there. So, Wei,
Hi, Janet.
you and I first met, I think it was about 6 years ago. This is before Alibaba went to IPO, had its IPO, before Alibaba Pictures was formed. I was running around, I was tailing Jack Ma for a while, and he said, oh, you have to meet so-and-so and so-and-so. I met a lot of the co-founders, so he said, but you really have to meet Wei Zhang. Now I know why. But there was no Alibaba Pictures then. Tell us how it emerged. What were the origins of deciding to go into content? We've seen other e-commerce companies now do the same in this country.
Right.
Tell us what the process was like for you.
Sure. So most people know Alibaba from our e-commerce service, but we really see ourselves as building the infrastructure for commerce, and that includes not just the physical products, but also digital ones and services. And entertainment is a big consumption category for our consumers. So we have over 700 million consumers on our platform that enjoying our e-commerce services. And then we want to use the technology, the know-how, the market intelligence that we have accumulated over the past 20 years to also bring quality entertainment to our consumers. And on top of that, also, we're a very mission-driven company. You've heard Jack talk about the double H strategy, where we want to focus on health and happiness in the next 10 years, and entertainment is an important way to bring happiness to people.
Yes, he's certainly a very entertaining character, too, and he is sort of a natural on camera. But when you took over for Alibaba Pictures, what were your goal? How did you decide you were going to choose material, or what you were going to make, what you were going to bring into China? How did that, those questions get answered for you, given the background of Alibaba?
Sure. So we see ourselves, as far as Alibaba Pictures is concerned, not as a traditional film studio. Alibaba Pictures is a division of Alibaba Digital Entertainment Group, which is a division of Alibaba Group, right? So we see ourselves really leveraging the ecosystem that we have built over the past 20 years to bring additional value to the entertainment industry, right? And part of our strength is we're one of the few companies that originated in China, but also built a global reputation. So from day one, when we formed Alibaba Pictures, globalization is always part of our core strategy. So we are here, we have an office here in LA. We want to be the gateway from Hollywood to China. And the fact is, Chinese audience love Hollywood movies, right? Most of people in China prefer to watch imported movies in its original language, and then with the subtitles. So we see big opportunities for quality stories to find its way to its audience in China. And we believe we know the Chinese consumers well. And China is a big market. It's difficult to navigate. So we want to be here to be in the same time zone with our partners to help them understand how to navigate through the landscape of the industry in China, and then hopefully help good stories to find its audience.
One of the things we've heard from several panelists this morning is how diverse the taste of the Chinese audience is.
Yes.
So how do you pick the winning horse it's hard enough as it is, as we were discussing earlier, but now you have an audience whose taste is just growing, expanding by the minute. Absolutely. And there's so many surprises. So you've recently imported quite a few films that did extremely well, but all very, very different. Can you describe?
Sure.
How do you account for that?
Sure. I think about even 6-7 years ago, I would say most of the films exported from here to China are those big tentpole movies, right, with big special effects, action sequence. But I think the Chinese audience has been getting more and more sophisticated over the years, and they have developed their taste into different genre of films. So we, of course, work with the big tentpole films like the Mission Impossible series to help them market and distribute in China. But at the same time, we also want to bring a diversity of stories to the Chinese audience. So in the past year, we have focused on that, and we have had some great success in China. One of them is the Academy-winning film Green Book that we decided to bring to China. This is part of our ambulance output. And on the surface, that film does not seem very obvious to the Chinese audience, right? It's set on a historical background that the Chinese audience might not be all familiar with. But we really saw that beneath that historical background is a human story, right? It's about two individuals, very different from each other, and then go on a journey together and learn how to embrace each other's differences and build friendship. That theme we feel was very universal in a way, that to audience anywhere around the world. So with that, I think the important point of picking film for China is to find that emotional connection to the audience, right? So we found that films, the central theme of that on friendship, on embracing differences was something that is very familiar to the Chinese audience. But then we had to work on to help them understand the background, right? And then to sort of, also the film was in the award race at that time. We actually decided to bring the film to China before it had got to all the nominations from the Academy. But we felt that it's important to help them to understand the background of the film a little bit. Even the name of the film, Green Book, right? Why is it called Green Book? We actually contemplated for a while whether or not we should change the Chinese translation of the film to something that is more straightforward. But then we eventually decided we're still going to stay on Green Book, and then rather than change the name, but to offer some sort of a background on why the Green Book is.
What was the translation ultimately? Was it?
It's 绿皮书. It's literal translation, right?
But then you had to really explain.
We had to explain the historical backdrop.
It would not have any resonance right off the bat.
Exactly, because that name of the movie is so important to the story, right? And it's a historical fact, right? So, but then we also felt that we need to build that emotional connection with the audience. So one way to do that is really to find a central theme that the audience can identify with. And then one of the things we found in the movie is that there's that one line in the movie that talk about people are lonely because they're afraid to take the first step. I think many of us feel like that sometimes, how to belong, feeling lonely. So we really emphasized on that one line, and then we actually put that one line on big billboards all over China without even mentioning about the movie. It's basically a person, coming out of the darkness, one individual with this one line. And then we have so many audience commenting that they come out late in the evening from work, and then they see this big billboard right in front of them, and then they just felt that emotional connection right away.
Without even knowing that.
That
it was connected to the movie.
But that emotional connection is so important. That brought it home for them, right? But then on top of that, we talk about windows, right? So it's important also to pick the right release window for the film in China. We had the film actually have gone through all the processes in 2018, but then we intentionally sort of held it the release date. We wanted to see if we would catch any recognition during the award season. So when the film won a few Golden Globe awards, we announced the film might be coming to China. And then when the Oscar nomination came out, we announced the release date. And then we wanted the release date to be the first Friday after the Oscar award ceremony. And it turned out that our film is the one sort of closest tailing the award ceremony in the history of releasing Academy-winning films in China.
Because you did so much prep work.
We had so much prep work.
You had chosen the film. You're saying you chose the film long before it had any Oscar buzz.
But we really planned for the release date.
And you were able to plan the release date, which is difficult to do in China often.
It is, but then if with careful planning, and then also we're co-financier of the film, so this is really one of our film as well, right? So the day of the Academy, which is a Sunday night here, we were planning a big event, which is already Monday in China, right? So we planned special screenings. We couldn't get any talents in China because they were all here for the Academy ceremony. But then we had pre-recorded their greetings and everything. We had planned multiple screenings that evening, Monday night. And then, with the release on the Friday, so it actually really was carefully planned ahead of time. Right? And then we also get all the Alibaba businesses in the ecosystem to have some fun, because the film is really fun, right? It's humorous, had great music, and had a lot of food in it. A lot of the Chinese audience actually commented that after watching the movie, they're just so hungry, right? There's the hot dogs, the pizzas, right? The chicken, the soda. So we did a cross promotion with Alibaba, which is one of our top food delivery service in China. So basically, we're offering people that have seen Green Book that they can get 30% off of all the foods they've seen in the film. Right, so it really works, right?
Definitely,
Yeah.
you know, definitely anything with food,
yes.
It helps in China.
Yes.
Were you able to capitalize on the fact that the Oscars had just completed?
Absolutely.
Do a lot of people watch the Oscars?
Yes.
This is something as a board member of the Academy I'm particularly interested
Yes.
in. But enough people were watching so that they knew there was another event following that. And of course, there must have been huge tears all over China when it won.
Yes.
Knowing that they could see the movie the next day.
Yes, definitely.
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
I don't
really
think
worked out.
anybody could plan this exactly. It was a combination of the luck with the Academy, but also your really detailed planning in advance. Well, tell us about some of because the 3 movies that I'm aware of, 4 movies actually that I'm aware of that you brought in that have all done spectacularly well. One is A Dog's Purpose, or Dog's Life initially, which had an unfortunate series of events here, which prevented the film from really opening in a proper way.
Right.
But also last year's Oscar for the Best Documentary, Free Solo, with Jimmy Chin and Chai. Yes. And then also, strangely, a Lebanese film that most of you have probably never even heard of. It was the film that was submitted for Best Foreign Film called Capernaum.
That's right.
Talk about each of those, if you would, because each film is so distinct and so different. So there's no cookie cutter marketing plan for them, obviously.
Absolutely. We're very honored and humbled to be able to bring these series of a quality film into China. And you're right, they're also different, right? But then there's a central theme in it that we also focus on, Alibaba as a company, that we really love to bring stories that we call them small, big, positive, meaning, small stories, big, small story, small budget, right? These films are all very small budget, big heart, and a positive impact. And then all these films actually all have that central theme to it, right? So, and then this year we especially had a run with the Academy sort of nominated and winning films, right? So soon after Green Book, we helped Fox market Bohemian Rhapsody in China, which was also really fun because it was been a while since the film was released in the States, but we had this karaoke event where you can come to the theater and sing. The last part of the movie is a concert itself, right? So if you have the lyrics there, you could sing with it, right? You know how Chinese people love karaoke, right? So it was really, really fun. And then afterwards, we picked this little Lebanese Oscar Best Foreign Picture nominated film called Capernaum. This film is a one of a kind, I would say, right? Because this film has not made over $1 million box office anywhere in the world. So we picked it because we felt this is such a heartfelt story about this little boy. Basically, he was born. The family had so many children that the parents neglected him, and he was on his own to find hope for himself, basically, right? So we felt nowadays, especially the millennials in China, the Chinese audience, they're very they have empathy towards things that they feel that they can, sort of pour their heart out to. So we felt that film has so much heart in it that you will connect with our audience. But then again, the film was so small, so you really have to then think about what's the right release strategy for that. We actually was very bold on this one. We released this film head on with Avenger film. Basically, we're in the same release window. And that release window was pretty much preempted by, that great film.
You could even get screens for that movie.
Exactly.
How did you convince the exhibitors?
So basically, first there was the Beijing Film Festival in April where we invited the director to go to China and then did a bit of marketing on that. And then soon after that, we have announced that we are going to release the film in China. But then we felt, so Avengers was released during the May Labor Day holiday window. It's a pretty good window in China. But then we felt for Avengers, it's a little bit skewed towards male, right? And then,
Laudable.
right? And then a lot of people prefer to see in the 3D theater, but there are a lot of 2D screens in China, right? And also Capernaum is more a female-oriented film, right? So we felt like it's a holiday weekend. People, of course, will go to see the Avengers, but then, for the 2D films and for the female audience, if they want some drama, some heartfelt story, and Capernaum is also a good choice. So we sort of went into, and then the good thing with Avengers in the market is actually sort of build up the overall market in China. And then that's a film we actually also really worked hard to localize it. And it is a film we actually changed the name, its name in China, in the China market, because Capernaum literally means chaos, actually. And the film, if you see the posters anywhere else in the world, it really represents the state of life that the little boy had experienced. But in China, we felt it is so important to give people hope, not making them feel like they had to see a very sad story during the holidays, right? So we changed the name. Instead of Capernaum Chaos, we changed it to Where's My Home? 何以为家? Where's My Home? Because home is a theme that the audience can all relate to, right? And then we changed the poster to the last shot of the movie, which is the little boy in the bright yellow sweater and smiling, right? This is the only time he smiled in the film, literally. But then it just gave people hope, right? And then we also changed sort of the tagline of the film to I want to sue my parents because they gave birth to me, right? So it's a little bit sort of contrast to the warm tone of the film, right? So that created curiosity, and the film is such good quality. The screenings created word of mouth, and then we localized the name of the film, brought it home to the audience, and then we went with a big window for us. So it ultimately paid off. It made over $53 million box office in China, which is incredible.
It's really phenomenal. I think it sounds like what you're saying, if you tap into the right sentiments for the Chinese audience, they will go. There's so much curiosity and hunger to see all different kinds of films.
Absolutely.
So the numbers can be there.
Yes.
And I do find that with most Chinese films that have done well, there is something that pulls on your heartstrings.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And family, home, food, those are common themes. What about A Dog's Life, which I guess is just a natural
Well, A Dog's Purpose is
an
an interesting story because it's a small film, right? So most people thought it's a sweet film, but more for people to watch at home. But then we, through our understanding of the Chinese consumers, that there are a lot of middle-class Chinese population that they own pets, right? Having pets is a lifestyle, sort of like lifestyle change for the middle-class Chinese consumers. And it's so warm. If you notice the Chinese social applications, anytime there's something related to a pet, it always gets like multiple forwards, right? So we felt there's a connection between human and animal and then the love for that. And also we went into our digital offerings and see if there's any market intelligence that will support that. And the director has done a film called Hachi. I don't even think it was released here in the US theatrically, but that film was based on a true story of a dog in Japan that stayed in the train station after his owner passed away to wait for him to come back. And that film,
for years. If you haven't, there was a Japanese movie made first, and then they did an American movie. This dog waited for years, if not decades, for his master to come back.
Exactly. It's such a heartwarming story, right? And then under Douban, which is sort of the Chinese like Rotten Tomato like site, that there are over 400,000 comments on Hachi. That it's not just one line like I love the film. It's more like people talk about their life stories, what having pet friendship mean to them, and some of them wish their boyfriends were like have the loyalty of their pets, right? So it's really, really heartwarming. So we brought the film to China. We did a bunch of creative marketing on the film. At one point, we had people that they could bring their dog to walk the red carpet, and then to watch the film together in the movie theater. So you literally have this theater full of people having, the human and the dog. And amazingly,
the dogs get their own seat?
The dog get their own seat, and the pee pad, very important, right? So, but amazingly, we're worried. What about the dogs all start barking at each other? But they watched the whole entire movie peacefully.
Dogs,
right? It was just amazing. It's such a special
Nobody
connection.
thought of doing that here.
Ambulance actually said we wish we could do that in the U.S.
Dog's Life ran into trouble here because the human rights group came out and said there was abuse of the dog, but then it turned out to not even be true.
Nothing.
But the movie lost its release here.
Yeah, we canceled our release event.
The premiere.
Yeah.
So this is such an interesting contrast. I have to say for myself too, I'm really glad that the reputation of Chinese people and their relationship to dogs has changed, because I think many of you know what people used to think about Chinese and dogs, right?
Right.
And it's so good to know that Chinese are seen as being animal loving.
Absolutely.
As opposed to animals something else.
Yes. Yes. And then Free Solo, thanks to you that you connected us with the filmmakers, right? So again, this story is amazing.
It is amazing.
It is amazing.
With a very happy ending. You're watching that, it's a white knuckle ride just watching that film.
It's part of a movie I watch like this, right? But it's a film that deserves to be exhibited on the big screen in the theater. Right?
Absolutely.
So to us, it is so important to bring this kind of quality experience to the Chinese audience to experience in the theater. Because we have come a long way from like 10 years ago, maybe 4,000 screens, and then 10 years now, 66,000 screens in China, right? So we want the big screens to be able to showcase the beauty of quality films. So then we brought this film in, and I think the China release is even wider here than here in the U.S. We brought we brought Alex in, we brought Elizabeth.
Oh, Alex went over.
Alex went over. Oh my God, he had so many fans there. And then again, to the millennial, to the young Chinese audience, which in China the core movie audience is younger here than the U.S. Right, 18 to the 28-year-olds. Doing extreme sports, being able to express themselves. It's a new way of life, right? They love the courage, the bravery in the film. So we did this premiere event in this rock climbing field. That was just incredible.
Amazing.
Yes.
And there is a somewhat of a health kick now, I know, going on in China, so
definitely
that helps too.
Definitely.
So these movies, again, they're so different. We wish here, I remember last year we had Xu Deng over, and a movie like 我不是药神, Dying to Survive, which is very much sort of like a Dallas Buyers Club. It's a movie based on a true story. That kind of movie, no matter how well it's done, would only reach a certain box office here. It would be capped at a certain level. And yet in China, it could be a huge blockbuster. You're taking foreign language movies from countries that in America people probably have never even heard of. Like if you ask people where Lebanon was, they probably couldn't tell you. Or you take documentaries, or you take movies that are considered more family movies like Dog's Life, and you can make big hits out of them. How enviable that is.
We believe that we have 1.4 billion people in China, right? So I really believe that every story can have its own audience. Right? It's a matter of who they are and have a way to find them. Right? And the Chinese audience are developing their taste in different genres of films. So there's tremendous opportunity, not just for one genre of film, for different type of stories to be told in China. So we're very excited about that.
We're very excited too, because I think when people see how movies can do elsewhere, and Mike Ellis gave that great talk this morning, maybe it will help spur people on to say, maybe we're missing out, maybe we're a little too narrow-minded in our tastes. I'm looking at the clock, I know you're hungry, but I also feel like since nobody else has had time for questions, I'm gonna take one or two at the most, and then we'll let you go eat. If anybody has questions for Zhang Wei, if not, I will, yes.
You're getting a mic. Yeah.
Hi, Julia Pierpont. Very curious to see what you think the co-production landscape is between China and the U.S. at the moment.
Sure. So part of our mission here is, to be it means to be the gateway from Hollywood to China is not only helping the imported films, right, to get imported into China, but also hopefully find a way to tell global stories. And co-production is an area that we strongly believe in and want to continue to work on. But the kind of co-production we really want to do is not the simple kind where you stick a Chinese actor or actress into it. We love to develop stories that are organic, that really make sense to have a cross-cultural theme to it. So there are certain films that fit that category, right? I just met with the actress that played the mom in
Diana
Farewell.
Lynn, yes.
Yes.
The mother of Farewell.
The mother of Farewell, right? From what I understand, that is also a co-production film.
Yes.
And then that's a great sort of, cross-cultural film that can be shot in China with great Chinese cast. So I do think, and then there are other stories. People always say, oh, what do you think is a perfect co-production movie? I would say like something like the movie Martian, right? That is about Matt Damon going to space, and then eventually he was able to come home because China abandoned their space mission and went to saved him. But then this really makes sense, right? Because China is one of the few countries in the world that has a space program. Many people thought, oh, there was maybe some thoughts behind it, but they didn't know that in the book itself, because Martian is based on the book, the China sort of part of the story was written in much lengthy sort of a proportion in the book that was very, very organic, right? So I feel it's a story like that, it's perfect to tell a global story with organic Chinese elements in it.
Beautiful. I'm so sorry. I feel like I have to give you time to eat too. But we are about to break for lunch. There's 2 lunch areas today. You'll have to look at your badge to see which one. Sorry, speakers and sponsors are on that side and everybody else is on this side. We want to meet exactly at 1 o'clock because we have a very special guest, Daniel Day Kim, coming. I know you want to meet him as well. So thank you very, very much. There'll be more time during breaks to chat with one another, and hope to see you this afternoon for more fun. Take care. By the way, I have to just say, Wei and I did not plan this.
I know,
we did not plan this, nor did I know the color of the backdrop. So, please. Thank you so much for coming.
Gonna make a change for once in my